Hey guys, just finish what I'm doing here. All right, I think we're good to go. So I heard that I seem to be plagued continuously by audio issues. I have a new revenue stream coming in, so hopefully I'm not going to have this problem again soon, because I can just replace some of this older stuff that's been kind of stagnating lately. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to read off a few donations that I got. English Times donated $3 to me and just left a message, keep up the good work. Thank you very much, English Times. I believe he actually has a YouTube channel himself. And I'm not sure if... I've been on Celtic Cat's stream, but not his stream, so... Maybe I'll be on his in the future. I have another donation from A for $20. Thank you very much. But it's a private message, so I will keep that to myself. But I appreciate the support, A. Brutal Mercer Pill. And Yakub's secretary. Yakub's disciple is sad to announce Chud the Builder's rejection from the gates of Trusel Agartha. He was not mugshot maxed to Yakub's likeness. Well, we'll have to see what happens. See, what was interesting about the start of this saga, like, okay, so first of all, let me make it clear. Obviously, Chud the Builder is, and oh, actually, before I even get into Chud, I should explain, like, this is going to sound a little wignatty, and, I mean, there are elements of it that I'm going to be talking about, but, for people that are opposed to, wignattery, I just want to say, consider that I'm quite nuanced on other topics. Like, there was a previous stream where I defended Robert Mugabe, which is like the exact opposite, right? So I would ask anybody who is not affiliated with that camp or even is actively opposed to that camp to give me the chance to make my case about what's going on with Chud the Builder. Because it's not just about like good whites and bad black people, you know? Like, I think there's a more nuanced explanation of what is going on here. And actually, it gives me an opportunity to recap my politics video. The politics video that I did, I wasn't really satisfied with it because I found that it was a little too technical. It was a little too heavy on the jargon. And I think a lot of people would not get it didn't land the same way that my Copegenics video didn't land, because I used a lot of jargon in the Copegenics video, balancing selection, like Darwinian stuff, that people would need to have explained in the comments section. And I ran into a similar problem with my politics video because it's not something you could really deal with on a surface level if you didn't already have some familiarity. So the Chud the Builder phenomenon kind of gives an opportunity to talk about that. And anybody, I think, is going to be able to use my analysis on this for their own situation, like regardless of what their own background is. Because it's pretty much just in-group versus out-group dynamics. It's not really about whites versus blacks or whites versus, the usual suspects, etc. So that's what I wanted to preface. Yeah, Chud the cell block builder. Well, he is kind of a Johnny Somali type. Like he's very clearly a provocation streamer. Though the difference between him and Johnny Somali is Johnny Somali was in a third-party country. He was in Korea and Japan, harassing the locals there. And, of course, these countries, first of all, they don't have a First Amendment, unlike America. And second of all, he's a foreigner in their countries. They're going to prioritize their own citizens in that situation. So Johnny Somali getting the book thrown at him for harassing the locals is perfectly reasonable. It's perfectly understandable. In the case of Chud the Builder, it's a little more complicated because he is doing, strictly speaking, legal activities. You can go up to people and call them racial slurs. Felltree said, did I get banned? No, I don't think so. Do you mean from the Discord server? I think I've banned like one person or maybe two people in the entire time that I've had my Discord server up and running. If you have an issue with my Discord server, just shoot me a message on Discord and I will see if I can figure out what's going on there. Because I'm quite certain, Felltree, that I did not ban you. You would have gotten repeated warnings about if there was like issues with things you were doing on the server. So Johnny Somali check or look, I mean, it is funny. Okay, Felltree. Just if you click the description section on the stream, there should be an option like a link to the Discord server, and you can get in there. I'm not active, like plugged into my Discord right now, but if you send an @ to the moderators, you should be able to get in. Just at the moderators or at Ugly Dirtbag, and he's usually on, so he'll be able to let you in. But yeah, Johnny the Somali and Chud the Builder, they're funny, like they're entertaining, but it's like a lowbrow kind of entertainment, right? And obviously, Chud the Builder, he was doing it just for the sake of making money. That was the primary goal because it was like shock humor, right? That is true. However, there is an element of reality with the American situation. Because the way that America works is, in some ways, it resembles like a minority-ruled country, kind of like Syria or Iraq. Oh, hey, Thomas White, how you doing? You should have listened to Scott Adams' advice. No, actually, I disagree with that. I think, like, okay, in a vacuum, I think what Chud was doing was really rude, and it was also not necessary, like harassing these people that are obviously not very intelligent and getting them to react in an aggressive way. In a vacuum, that's just lowbrow behavior, kind of like what Johnny Somali was doing in Korea, you know. But if you take it outside of the vacuum and you put it into context, America is in this weird situation where it's a minority-ruled country, and the purpose of the current system in the United States is to keep the majority population as weak as possible. And minority rule 2%. It's not 2% minority rule. It's more than that. Like, it's the 2% is the most important single element, but it's several different groups are opted into this. Like, this is what I'm going to be, one of the things I'm going to be talking about in a video that I'm working on, where I talk about type 2 errors, is you cannot win anything if you're just 2% of the population. You don't have the demographics, you don't have the power projection. You need to cut other people into this arrangement in order to keep the largest block of the population that could threaten your rule under control. And how do you do that? Well, you have to create a coalition of common interests. And this is how, for example, white women, to some extent, not entirely, but to a substantial extent, white women are pulled into the progressive stack because they're offered a position above white men. Right? So the deal is, like, you are oppressed under the white patriarchy. We will give you this liberation from the white patriarchy. We will allow you to project the sins of whiteness that we've created onto the white man, as long as you are subservient to the other pegs on the progressive stack. And the downside to that is, well, we know the upside. The upside is that they're able to gain access to the set-asides for women that are specifically for feminists, right? Women's affirmative action, etc. They don't have to deal with the same anti-white hostility. Well, I mean, they do have to deal with anti-white hostility, but they have a means of projecting it away by pointing to white men as being like the main actors in the situation. Like a lot of white feminists, what they'll do is they'll talk about how women didn't receive the right to vote until after black men did in the United States. So like they'll have ways of dissimulating from whiteness that white men do not. But even then, it's not a stable arrangement, because they have to do things like, for example, if you look at what happened in Rotherham with the Pakistani grooming gangs, because the victims were white women or white girls and the perpetrators were non-white men, this is a progressive stack issue, because white women are below men of color on the progressive stack, and therefore they cannot be targeted as a group. That doesn't mean that that feminists have to ignore the grooming gangs or whatever. Like, they don't necessarily do that. That would be too far of a reach. But what they do is they avoid any kind of recognition of the group identity of the men involved. They cannot be identified as Pakistani. They have to be identified as men, because that's the only identification that white feminists are allowed to make. They can either specifically refer to white men. They can include like racism and white supremacy as part of their critique of white men. But when it comes to other men acting as a group against white women, they can only refer to them as men. They cannot refer to their group. That's a really key element. But as a result, this is an unstable situation, because a lot of these feminists are put in a position where they have to defend effectively the grooming gang perpetrators against critics from the right. critics from the right wing. Yeah, there's already 50 people watching. We could probably thank Thomas White for that, because whenever he's in the chat, everybody wants to talk to him, because he's a very interesting guy. This is why he's so good at hosting people. The only problem with Thomas White is that he'll host. I think he's too tolerant with who he hosts, because he'll host people that will say crazy things, and then it gets the channel nuked, which, yeah, I've done as well. Like, I made that mistake in the first stream that I did. It was myself, actually, because I got my own stream nuked. But it's an unfortunate downside, because you have to realize that the YouTube algorithm is a lot less tolerant than you are of people's viewpoints. All this sounds incredibly Jewish. It is very Jewish, Slick on Top. But this is because you have to remember, like, they can't win any battle physically. Okay, it's not like I was pointing to Syria and Iraq, minority-ruled countries, as an example of like the kind of coalition system that the United States is in, but that's not quite accurate, because if you look at how Iraq was run, Iraq's power base was a military faction. It was the Sunni backed officer corps, or the Sunni, not the Sunni backed, but like the Sunni majority officer corps. In the case of Syria, it was the majority Alawite officer corps. Okay, they were like a military. It was a military elite that supported the government. We don't have that in the United States. The United States the control systems are much more indirect. There really isn't any military coercion. It's all done through extra military means, or extra force means, outside of the typical force pathways. So, like, you can't, for example, you cannot be censored formally by the United States government. You do not have a military, like the FBI, kicking your door down and shutting down your stream if you criticize a certain group. But what will happen is the group representatives will figure out what your banks are, what your employment is, and they will shut you down that way. And that is almost as effective as physically forcing you to shut down, because it makes it impossible to live, right? So it's almost like an obsolete model, having like a formal military regime dictatorship, like a brittle minority rule dictatorship, because these sort of outsourcing methods are a lot more effective. And to bring it around to what I was talking about with Chud the Builder, this is one of the tactics that they use in America with blacks to the greatest extent, but also other groups, is they will permit them to, they will differentially enforce the law. So it's not that they necessarily permit crime to happen, like with these groups of people, but they will make it so that like they will tolerate a level of crime for a combination of reasons, social justice reasons, etc. They will tolerate a level of crime that makes it very difficult for the white population to live in a given area, and this forces them out of the given area. And whenever there is a white-black conflict, a good example, most recent one, is, other than Chud the Builder, is the Carmelo Anthony versus, what's the kid's name? It was Carmelo Anthony and, let me find him. Carmelo Anthony. Or did I mix their names up? Let's see here. Austin Metcalf, Carmelo Anthony. Yes, that's it. The Austin Metcalf, Carmelo Anthony thing. So the reason why this is permitted is because, first of all, whenever there's a black-white conflict, because the liberal government, because it's a liberal system. Okay, actually, let me take a step back. So the way that liberalism works is the government cannot be used in a political way. And that sounds strange, because you're used to thinking of politics as like that's what the government's supposed to do. Like whenever you think about politics, you're thinking something concerning government. But when you say that there's a political act, this is where the state, like for example, if a Chinese billionaire criticizes the Communist Party of China, if the CCP makes him disappear, that is a political act. The Chinese state is acting against another individual or against a group. Like, for example, when the Chinese Communist Party cracks down on the Falun Gong movement, That's another example of a political act. It's the Chinese state is defining an enemy outgroup from the state and attacking them politically. The United States government, as a liberal government, cannot do that, formally speaking. In terms of their ideology, the way that liberal governments are supposed to work is that they are neutral, politically neutral, and procedural. So the purpose of the liberal government is just strictly to defend your individual rights and to ensure individual rights are respected. They cannot act as an independent agent separate from the procedures that they're defined by, like the Constitution, for example. Like that's why there's a separation of powers. That's why there's checks and balances. But there is still a political will in the system, because there's always a political will in the system. Now, typically in the United States, it manifests through judges, because judges are the ones that are able to interpret the law. Okay, in any area where there's any kind of subjectivity, where there's interpretation, where the judge can decide how a law is going to be practiced or how a law is going to be implemented, that is a point where political power can be exercised. And this is what we see. We see the system, and this is typically these liberal judges that share a certain worldview. Typically it's a progressive, I guess you could call it a globalist worldview. And they enforce that worldview through their judicial actions, right? And one of the ways that they do this is selective prosecution of the law. So yes, there are unequal situations. Chud the Builder got like $1.25 million bail bond, I believe. That's the requirement for him to get bail. And what was it? I remember reading this thing, and maybe I'll see if I can pull it up. There was a guy who was murdered two people, and it's been basically beyond a reasonable doubt that he murdered these two people, and he was out on $200,000 bail. It's very obvious that there's different standards being held here. And you say two-tier justice system, but the two-tier justice system exists because one of these groups is part of the political coalition and one of them is not. What I find really, and I wish I could find this video. Maybe a Black Cell will be able to link it to me, because I don't follow Tommy Sotomayor's stuff strictly. But there is this one video. There's this black guy called Tommy Sotomayor. He's very critical of black women. That's where he got his start. But he also does a lot of stuff on politics. Now, he's very much from a pro-black perspective, and he's very... I don't know if I would say like hostile per se. Like he's critical of whites and white men. Like he sees white men as political ops of black men, which I think is a fair assessment. Like he sees us as a political rivals, basically. Doesn't necessarily mean that he's always hostile to us, but he's always he's instinctively going to take the black side in a typical black-white conflict. But there was a video he did once where he talked about why whites are being targeted politically by the American system relative to other groups. And he was like, listen, it's like a chessboard. It's like a chessboard where there's pieces on the chessboard, and the U.S. government realizes that the white piece is the strongest piece on the board. And if the white piece were to get played, if there was a circumstance, and we could say whether it's possible that this could even happen or not, you could debate how possible that is. But if the white piece gets played, every other piece on the board is going down. That's what he said. Every other piece on the board is going down. Like the blacks, the Hispanics, any other group, they're going down if the white piece gets put on the board and starts getting played. And the state realizes this. Like this is the single biggest threat that they have, is this white population. Okay? As pathetic as the white population is, like we make jokes about how cocked whites are, right? The fact remains, there's 180 million whites. They're very well armed, and they're capable of organization on a level that blacks cannot, and that probably Hispanics cannot. Hispanics can organize on a neighborhood level. They couldn't organize on a national level in America. Okay, whites can, in theory. And this is why they are targeting them first and foremost. And Tommy did this video on this, and it was an excellent video. And it was from a couple of years back. So this was, I even think it was pre-COVID. But it's a damn shame because I was going to use it for the stream, but I couldn't find it. We don't talk about the white boomer Judge Menace enough. That's true. We don't. Well, in every liberal system, the judiciary is where the power lies. Like wherever the power lies, the power is where interpretation of the law happens. The power is not where execution happens. Like there's this meme that's been going around, and it's very true, is how Trump is able to act in this unilateral fashion. He can attack Iran. He can overthrow the government in Venezuela. He can threaten Cuba. He can threaten the EU. He can threaten Canada. He can do all of these things unilaterally to outside groups. But he is completely helpless internally. He can't enforce the laws in Minnesota. He can't enforce the laws in New York. He can't enforce federal law in California. Like all the power that he has is projected outwards into other countries. He has basically no power internally in the United States. And that's because the executive branch does not have that ability. Who does have that ability is the judiciary. Because the judiciary and the legislative branch also doesn't really have that much power either. Because they can draft and pass laws, but who interprets the laws when they come to be challenged or when they're meant to be implemented into the population? Like when you go from passing a law to the law getting enforced on people, who determines the enforcement? It's the judges. The judges determine the enforcement. That is the weak link. That is the hole in the dike. That is the power point of any liberal system, is the judiciary. And you see this exact same problem again and again and again. There's this actually there's a really good example of this is Meloni in Italy. Meloni, I don't think that she was lying, because people have this impression that she was just faking her entire campaign, and that her plan was just to get into power and then like milk everything, but not actually solve any of the problems, not deport anyone. The reality was, when Meloni got into power, she was attempting to do what she promised, where she was trying to get rid of these refugees and to shut down the boat migrants. But she was stymied at every level by the judiciary in Italy. The judiciary shut her down and prevented her from implementing her policies. And this is what happens in all of these countries, right? If you don't capture the judiciary, you're completely screwed. And yes, hurrah, you're saying judiciary. That's exactly what they did. That was one of the first things they targeted, was the legal system and the judiciary. Because once you get control of who is implementing the laws and who interprets the laws, that's when you can make critical changes. Like, what was one of the most critical changes in the United States? The most critical change was Roe v. Wade in the 70s, where abortion was imposed on the entire country. And again, I'm actually not somebody who's like ideologically taking a strong side on abortion. Like, I kind of like how Europe does it, where it's, the first few weeks it's considered acceptable, but then not after that. I think that's a reasonable compromise. I'm not getting into the philosophy of it, because I think that there's valid, I think the philosophical position of the pro-life is more valid in terms of their arguments, like rational arguments. But if we're talking about practicality, like the Europeans at least were able to come up with a compromise, a practical compromise. But how did that manifest? Well, it was like the way that Roe v. Wade was interpreted. It's like women need to have this right to an abortion because of effectively, I forget which judge it was that passed it, but he argued that in his statement that women need access to abortion as part of their lifestyle in order to achieve their lifestyle. And if they can't have access to abortion freely and fairly, they are not able to fulfill the mystique of life. It was like really weird wording. That's the point I'm trying to make. I'd have to look it up. But very strange wording that doesn't actually make sense, really. Like, it doesn't make sense from a judicial point of view. Because the judiciary, you're just supposed to interpret the law as strictly as possible, as constitutionally as possible. But the way that Roe v. Wade was passed, it was completely, which is why it got thrown out, by the way. Roe v. Wade got thrown out for that reason, because the legal language around it when it was passed by the Supreme Court just was stupid. It made no sense. But all you have to do, as I said, all you have to do is capture the judiciary, and that's what you got. And the Hart-Celler Act, that was also critically important. The Hart-Celler Act was critically important. However, the actual act itself didn't really radically alter the rate of immigration. It altered the composition of immigration, so it allowed for immigration from other parts of the world. But if you actually look at where most of the demographic change in the United States came from, it did not come from legal immigration. It came from illegal immigration and then amnesty. Well, where's the actually let me look that up actually. Where's the legal basis for amnesty in the United States? Let's see here. Judicial basis for amnesty in the United States under Reagan. Let's see here. The judicial basis was grounded in the statutory authority of the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986, which was passed by Congress and signed into law. Sweeping bipartisan statute enacted by Congress, the legal foundation rests on Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution, which grants to Congress the plan. Okay, so this was congressional, judicial, and administrative interpretation. Under the IRCA, the judicial and administrative interpretation fell to the former Immigration and Naturalization Service. To qualify for amnesty, applicants had to prove they entered the United States before the 1st of January 1982. Imagine being the guy that shows up January 1st, 1982, and you're fucked. You're illegal for 50 years now, or 40 years. Continue on law. Congress. President Reagan used his executive authority to expand the scope. He authorized a blanket deferral of deportation for minor children of parents. Oh, minor children. Let me see here. Judicial. The federal courts played a role in the interpretation and implementation of the law. Landmark Supreme Court cases such as Reno v. Catholic Social Services later defined the parameters of judicial review for immigrants who sought legalization under the IRCA but were entangled in administrative delays. Okay, so the Reagan one was more of a, all right, I got to take the L on this one. The Reagan one was actually just an executive thing. This is like the most based president of American history. Conservatives love Reagan. And Reagan was one of the few presidents who actually used his judicial authority to fuck over Americans. Or, well, no, there are American presidents that have done that, but he's like the conservative president that did that. Yo, why can't I see my comment on the stream chat? Which comment are you talking about? Oh, what happened to Metacan? Metacan is still around. Like, actually, I think that he's in the chat. I've been telling him like what he's got to do. Metacan, I think, has a niche that he could do. Where, if he was in Thailand, he could like do streaming of hobo maxing in Thailand. Not literally hobo maxing, but like living as cheaply as possible on an almost comical level, and people I think would find that entertaining at least, you know. I've talked to him about it in the past. Like, I think that would be a way to revive his channel. But, you know, other than that, there's not really much to do, right? Unless you're super plugged into political stuff, right? Because that's like one niche that I don't think has been filled. Like, okay, so if we look at Thailand, I know he's not in Thailand now, but I'm just saying, like, because he plans on going back there, that would be one of the things that he could do. Because I don't think there's a niche. Like, there are like the mainstream streamers in Thailand that will, or, you know, people making videos where they're like normies that are well-to-do and they have like really polished videos and they talk about how wonderful things are. And then you have boomers that do like selfie cam, low effort videos where they talk about they talk about their lives or whatever, and it's a little more informative, I suppose, for guys on our level. But then you have nothing else other than that, right? Like there's no sort of like, if you're an inky subhuman and you're also broke and you're trying to survive in this country, like you could make it fun by recording it, being like, these are tricks that I've figured out to survive in the country on like $10, what is it, like maybe $5 a day or something, you know? Why would you want to be surrounded by a bunch of short brown Asians? Well, I mean, it's beggars can't be choosers. You know what I mean? And also, to be quite honest with you, like we know people that are in Thailand, by we I mean on my server, who are living there, and other countries that are cheaper. The cost of living is such that you could live quite comfortably on $1,000 a month. Well, maybe it's a little higher now because of the oil shock, but the point is, you can live quite comfortably with very little money. And this is actually attractive in and of itself. Like women are brought in as like one of the other reasons, of course, but just on its own, if the only thing that you're looking for is cost of living being much easier on you, and you being able to do more things with the amount of money you have, if you assuming that you have like a revenue stream, that's one of the options. You have to decide whether that's worth it for you or not, right? And yeah, the whole sphere is dying. Well, actually, there is something that I wanted to talk about, Lone Hiker, that is not directly related to the Chud the Builder thing. Like, that was the most interesting thing that's been happening. But there's something else I wanted to talk about. And I'm not going to name names because I don't want to make any enemies in the sphere. But I have noticed that there's a certain type of BP adjacent content creator, and they'll just make, and okay, so I got to make a distinction between this type and the earlier versions of this, because there's like the earliest stuff, and Rehab Room is an example of this, because we all know he was originally Inky TV, and Face No LMS would do his live streams, and they would talk about like the circumstances as a sub 5 male, or as the standard is going up now, but they would talk about the sort of plight of excess males and like what you don't have as options or opportunities, and it was really authentic. Like actually a great example of this. And this will be an old cell tell, if you guys know who I'm talking about here. Blue Skies Media. Have you guys heard of Blue Skies Media? Now, this is a real old cell channel. Like, if you know who Blue Skies Media is, you've been around a while, because he's been gone for a long time. Here, I'll type his name. Blue Skies Media. So, Blue Skies Media was, he was like 5'6", I think. He's quite short. No, he's not Irish. He was from New York, and I think he was like part Portuguese and part something else. Maybe he was part Portuguese, part Irish, but I know he was part Portuguese. But he's short, and you could tell, like, okay, he would really go on, like, and he was, okay, we could talk about him being a little bit crazy, but he was sincere, right? He was sincere about his situation. His wife, I remember that his wife died, wife, it was like, I think it was his living girlfriend or whatever. It was this like fat black woman. She, like, he was totally over the moon about her, which again is another thing that it annoys me when I see comments on by normies and by women that'll say like, oh, well, these guys, they just want Stacy's. That's what their issue is. They're mad about being Stacy's, or not getting Stacy's. And when I look at Blue Skies Media, like, I've seen pictures of the guy's former girlfriend, and this was by no means a Stacy, all right? Like, she was not exactly a very attractive woman, but because she was his, that meant an enormous amount to him, and it really like devastated his life when she died. And you could tell over the course of the videos that he was making, he was sort of like losing his mind. And I know that there's a lot of people that trolled him, and there was an element of trolling, but I think for the most part it was just sort of spiraling due to loneliness. And he just became increasingly more unhinged and unstable. And I can kind of understand that, especially as you get older. I know, because, well, I don't know if I mentioned this to Steve Hoka when I was talking to him, but I've noticed that as you get older, if you don't have a intimate connection with a woman, and you're not interacting with women on a regular basis, if you're pretty much isolated to yourself and maybe other guys, you start to become more and more eccentric over time. Like your behavior becomes more and more off the norm relative to men in your age bracket. So like when you're 20 and you're talking to other 20-year-olds, you're still in sync with them because most 20-year-olds are not in like serious relationships or not have serious experience with women. A lot of them are still siloed into male spaces. When you start hitting your 30s, it becomes a little more noticeable where you could tell the guys that are like plugged into, I guess you could call it normiedom, where they're interacting with women and they can relate to women on some level because of their personal connection to them, like just association with them. And their social behavior is also influenced by that. Like, you know how autism is characterized as the extreme male brain? I think what happens is that when we don't have that female socialization, we become more and more default male brain. Like I am, for example, if I think of my interests are super specific and almost autistic in their rigid focus. You know, like it's I like geopolitics, but I like it in reference to like political philosophy. And my preferred political philosophy is very specific. It's like Schmittian group politics and sociology. And I don't really have a huge, and I also like economics, but I don't really have like a wide, shallow range of interests like a normie does. Like normies will have they'll like sports, they'll like whatever's on TV, they'll like video games of certain types. Like they have a wide range of these sort of shallow interests that they can relate to other people on. But because of how the male brain is structured, I think that it naturally causes us to focus in more and more and more on very specific things, on details. And as we get more isolated from women, as our distance from women grows, we become more and more eccentric compared to everyone else. That's my suspicion. And something I wanted to talk to Steve Hoka about, because I was going to ask him if he noticed, if he felt in some way like, well, you can't really feel eccentric yourself, but like feel like out of sync with other men in his age group. Because in his case, because he's in his 50s, the guys that he would be talking to, they would typically have like teenage kids, you know? So they would be integrated into a completely different social network, because it wouldn't just be women, it would also be their children, you know? And it's like how out of sync compared to the typical like 50-year-old normie do you feel you are? Because I can already feel myself coming out of tune with 30-year-olds that I talk to. It's actually funny because other than the other 30-somethings like on here that I talk to you guys with, like you guys are in my chat right now, I find that I can relate more to the 20-year-olds that I talk to than 30-year-olds in a more general sense, you know, because they're still, like, I think they're still more male-brained, the 20-somethings that have not a lot of female experience. So, and hey Mercer, out of all your high IQ vids, what's your favorite? My favorite is definitely my economics video, because I feel like I could have expanded that even more, but I really felt like I laid down a solid case. And as I said, that rehab room video he did on spawn points or whatever, I think it was like spawn points, he basically reiterated exactly what I had said, but from a personal perspective, because he came at it from a 30 perspective, right? Like he came from, I forget where, I think a Middle Eastern country, right? So he knows on a first-hand level exactly what I'm describing. I described it on a theoretical level, and he explained it on like a lived experience level. And I was really satisfied with that. And that's why I feel like it's my most complete video when it comes to videos I've made. Second would be women in the political. I really like women in the political because I think I nailed down the issue to a substantial degree. Felltree sent me $4.20. Well, thank you very much, Felltree. Let me see if there's a message attached to that. Felltree, it's like being the guy at 25 still talking about games or something when most of your friends don't have time to play them anymore. Yeah, 100%. Unless you can make a career doing that on YouTube or something like, what's his name? The Quartering did until recently. But then, look at what happened to the Quartering. I mean, I didn't know too much about him, but apparently he's into like cuck relationships or something. It seems like you just become really strange if you end up in like terminally online spheres for too long of a period in your life. That's what it seems like. And let me catch up here. I was actually told I was getting more eccentric, and people don't appreciate the interests. We don't appreciate the sports ball mainstream mind-numbing thinking. Most people flow through life. They don't analyze anything. You know what, Lone Hiker? I 100% agree with that. And this is actually something, I remember that there was this parable that was told. I don't know if there's any truth to it or if it's like a recent invention, but it was allegedly, there was this Hindu philosopher, and he was talking with another scholar, and he was like, we understand the deep esoteric truths behind our religion from this complex philosophical point of view. And there's a certain element of separation from the world that we get from that. Like, we can't directly connect the transcendent to the real. And because of that space, there's like a sense of anomie or a sense of out of placeness. And then he compares himself to this Hindu woman who's like an illiterate Hindu woman who's praying to an idol. And he's like, I wish that, on the one hand, I wish that I could experience that level of blind faith where you can just sincerely believe in this thing without understanding anything about it and without questioning it. But then at the same time, the amount of ignorance that you would have to have in order to reach that point, like the loss of knowledge, the loss of really awareness. Because that's really what knowledge comes from, right? Like, if you think about, like, why do you know things? Why do you want to learn something? It's because you become aware of something. You become aware of the existence of knowledge that you do not have, and you want to acquire it. And really, for these low IQ people, it's like a lack of awareness of this knowledge, right? Or there's a lack of awareness and then a lack of concern for understanding it, or lack of awareness of the importance of this knowledge. And he's like, if I were to become this woman, I would lose all of this. And so I couldn't do it. Even if I would be at peace, my mind would be at peace in a way that it's not now because I'm struggling with these philosophical issues behind the religion. I would lose so much of my awareness of the world and my knowledge of the world that it just wouldn't be worth it. It's like one of those catch-22s. And I kind of feel that way with normies and sports ball and all this shit, because they do kind of exist in a present progressive way where it's like they're just doing things. They exist in the world, and they never really think. They don't sit down and they don't think about the future really, and they don't think much about the past. They don't reflect on the world as it was and as it will become. They only really act in the moment. I mean, they will do planning in the sense of like, I need to do this task in order to achieve this outcome in the future, let's say. But they don't, like, it's like a utilitarian use of the ability to introspect. It's like they only see thinking about the past and thinking about the future as a means to fulfill whatever they want in the present, or like what they will want in the future. There's no real, they don't do metacognition. They don't think for the sake of thinking. They don't try to understand something for the sake of understanding it. You know what I mean? Oh, did I get another super chat from Feltry? Let me see here. Oh, thank you, Feltree. Another $3. A lot of us fall out of step with our peers in terms of being able to talk about shared interests due to money. A lot of us forget a reason so many normies are obsessed with sports is due to them viewing it through a gambling lens. You are actually right. Now, this is actually something I was naive about. I didn't realize that one of the reasons why normies get so interested in spectator sports is because of the gambling element. Like, this is how naive and innocent I am. I would just assume that they were interested in watching it happen. Yeah, wolf, sleep, or sell. Yeah, I mean, I would appreciate not doing that. Like if you want, like I stream at 2 p.m. on Sundays, Eastern Standard Time. If you want, we can figure out our streaming schedule so we don't conflict. But like I've had other, like I'll give you an example. There are people that out of good intentions towards me, they've gone into other people's chat rooms and said, I'm streaming when they were streaming. And I found it to be extremely, like, I know that if it were to happen to me, I would be extremely irritated by it. So I explained to them, like, I don't mind if you're promoting my channel in someone else's stream if I'm not streaming. If you're like, oh, Dark Pills with Mercer, this is a video that he did on, so I don't really care about that. But, like, trying to poach viewers from another person's stream, I think that could be seen as, like, very low trust behavior. It's, like, very Semitic behavior. Anyways, let me just catch up here. Imagine how worse it is in Romania where the average IQ is in the 80s. Well, you know what? Here's the thing. I actually kind of understand normie streaming. Or streaming, excuse me. My brain is scrambled because of the stream thing. Normie sports balling. I can kind of understand the appeal if it was like embedded teams. Like I was talking about this a while ago on my YouTube. Or Discord, excuse me. I was talking about how if, for example, the French or the Montreal team in hockey were descended from actual Montrealers, multi-generational Montrealers of the ethnic French background for the most part. Oh, also, like, because there's also English that have lived in Montreal. But if you made it where in order to join the Montreal team, you would have to have grandparents. 3 out of 4 of your grandparents had to be from Montreal. If you made that rule, that would make it, to me, that would feel way more interesting. It would feel like there's a much stronger connection to the city. Like, if the Montreal team wins, then I feel like Montrealers are winning. You know? That's how I would get interested in sports ball. Because, like, I was born and raised in Ottawa. If the Ottawa Senators were, and that's one of our hockey teams, if the Ottawa Senators were, you could only be an Ottawa Senator player if you were born in Ottawa. And again, 3/4 of your grandparents born in Ottawa. I would feel like, okay, these are kids that I probably have encountered in the street somewhere, and that like my grandparents encountered in the street somewhere, because my family's been in Ottawa for 100, 200 years. I would really enjoy that. Like, I would be like, yeah, I feel like I could actually, like, I wouldn't really be like super enthusiastic because I don't really care too much about sports, but I could enjoy sitting down and watching it because I would feel like these are actually guys on my team. Like, this is my team. These are my people. And if they're winning, then I feel like this is a win for us. But, you know, and I don't think I'm the only one who feels that way, because I remember when, if you guys remember that Argentina versus France game for European football, there was, and the French team is like almost all black, which they're not French, right? They're not actually French. They're mostly black. Okay, can we be honest about this? Okay, and the Argentine team, they were a lot whiter than the French team because they're actually ethnically European for the most part, Argentines. And when the Argentine team won against the French team, there was like all this cheering from various Europeans, including French, because they were like the white people won. You know, and it's not like a black versus white thing even necessarily. It's just the ridiculousness of the French team being composed of mostly Africans. It's very silly. It doesn't make sense. You know, like how does this represent? Well, I mean, the meme now would be France is so modified that yeah, it does represent France now. Like that would be the joke now, right? And the thing is, yeah, Thomas, sports ball would be way better if it were that way, 100%. And the thing is, for a lot of third world countries and second world countries, it is that way. Like African teams are pretty much all comprised of Africans. North African teams, like Tunisia, Algeria, they're mostly composed of their own people. Pretty sure East Asian teams for their own sports are the same way. So they do sincerely have a reason to support their side, support their team. You know, it makes a lot of sense for them. But for Europeans, I just don't understand it. Like the North FC meme is real. Yeah, 100%. Like it's so silly. Like the Ngubu meme. And actually, if you guys remember that thing where there was a whole moral panic because people were dropping the N-bomb on these Africans because they fucked up a kick, I think, in a football game in the I forget what team. I think it was Manchester United or something. But it was one of those. It was one of those teams, and it was the African kid Ngubu who fucked up the kick, and the Italian guy just dragged him, and the Italians won the match. And there was all these N-bombs that were being dropped on him. And as it turns out, there was an investigation into this because we have to investigate this. This is like a monumental crime against humanity that N-bombs were dropped on these guys. And as it turns out, it was mostly Arabs from the Gulf region because they had bet a lot of money on the game, and the Ngubu fucked up the game by missing the kicks. So it was quite funny in hindsight. It turns out it wasn't even white people that were dropping N-bombs, but yeah. It's like, what's the point? It's like, yeah, they may be the most efficient. They're like the best solution to, you know what it kind of reminds me of, actually? Because we could expand this a little bit. It reminds me of, like, if you guys have seen those pictures of spelling bee winners or of like math Olympiad winners. Or there was another one recently where this New York Post article posted that there were 23 valid. Actually, I'm going to pull this up. Hold on. 23. Here, or 21, excuse me, not 23. Take a look at this. All right, we're pulling it up now. It's quite funny. Arabs are racist, but not race realists. I think most people are. I mean, most people are not into race and IQ stuff. They don't understand archaeogenetics. They don't understand any of this shit. Most of them are just like, don't like them because they're of this background, you know, and that's fine. But that's how most people are. But take a look at this. Take a look at this. Long Island High School has record-breaking 21 valedictorians. What do we have here? I'm not seeing many traditionally American faces here. Actually, I'm trying to see if there's any like white kids in this at all. Or even like non-Asian, non-curry kids. Because they all just look like Indians and Asians. Like, okay, this is rice, ambiguous, rice, curry, rice, 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 curry, ambiguous, rice. Oh god, some of these are look at this bitch. Oh my god. I'm gonna do like Asmongold. Oh my god. Oh shit. I think I screwed up the there we go. Anyways, rice, rice, curry, rice, curry, rice, rice, curry. It's like 3/4 rice, 1/4 curry. And how does this in any way represent, well, I mean, it does now in America, because America is so diverse now. You can't even really say that anymore. But this reminds me of like there was this like South Africans win math Olympiad, and then if you look at the South African team, it's it was all like a mixture of white and Chinese kids on the South African team. So it's like African nation wins math Olympiad, and it's all just white nation kids. I mean, at that point, then though, what's the like? I don't understand what the drive is to like. How do you identify with this if you're not from this background? Like you don't like if you're an American, how much in common do you really share with these people in terms of not just your ethnic background, but like your lived experience, for example? 21 valedictorians, because I think valedictorian is basic. Okay, because it's been a long time since I've been in high school, and I don't remember like looking deeply into this. But valedictorians, I think they have like the highest grade in the class, right? Or something along those lines. And so the question then is, well, if there's 21 valedictorians, does that mean all these kids got 100% on their grades or whatever? Like, I'm not sure how it works, but I was just saying that one of the things we're going to see at some point in the future is we're going to see a replacement of all these extracurriculars and like the well-rounded character stuff that you hear from white liberal concepts of education. Like the concept of a liberal education was that you're supposed to learn about the classics. It's supposed to be like an improvement of your moral character. It's like a refining of your moral character. The original universities were religious institutions, and the purpose of them was to cultivate a certain character in the up and coming elite, including education. But that was the primary goal. Now, it resembles much more the Chinese Gaokao system, and the Gaokao in China is the state examination that basically determines your future. You know, like your score on this exam will determine if you can get into an acceptable university or not. And if you're like a rural Chinese without any money, this could determine whether you make it or you're basically trapped as a wage cuck in central China in permanent poverty, you know? And a lot of these kids, they treat it exactly that way. Yeah. And one of the biggest black pills for me is not even that I may even get to experience or do some things, but that they will never be felt, understood, and experienced by most people the same way. Do you mean like your subjective experience is different from the typical normie? Because I do agree. I'm not so sure if I would say that's a black pill, though. I mean, like, for example, when I was a kid, I remember I got my hands on this. Let me actually look up the Xbox TV Music Generator 3. That's it. MTV Music Generator 3. Okay. So as a kid, I had this on my Xbox, and I was able to. It was like an early version of FL Studio. If you guys have ever used FL Studio to make music, it was kind of like a version of that. And I was able to make my own little songs. And I mean, they were not, they were not really like Mozart or whatever. But there's a feeling of like when you create something that resonates with how you feel, and even if you're the only one that will ever listen to it, there is something really valuable, at least to me, about that. Like to this day, I still have my Xbox, my original Xbox hard drive with those songs on it. I haven't been able to access them because I haven't bothered to figure out how to get into an original Xbox hard drive and emulate it. But that is something that to this day, like I feel like it sounds kind of cheesy, but I feel like it's a part of me, because I made it and like I liked what I made. At least for me, that's what was important to me. Even if no other person hears it, I would actually prefer no other people hear it because I'd rather not hear other people's judgment of it. You know what I mean? It's like even if you had the looks or circumstance to have a lot in life, it would never be as genuine or real to others as it is to you. Scary thought. Oh, yeah. I'm just realizing I'm watching 9 minutes off live. Oh, that may be why you're off kilter there with me. Delta Force 1997. Oh, hey, Metacan. Delta Force 1997 was the first game I played. Very underrated simulator. Yeah, simulators are fun. Mercer was the OG incel core artist. Actually, we got to give credit where it's due here. Gresh, I think, who I use, I've used his music, with his permission, of course. And that's every intro, the first 15 minutes, that song is by Gresh. And Gresh was one of the OGs of the BP in our sphere. And he also made his own, he has like entire albums worth of his own custom-made music on YouTube. And actually, I might pull it up. Hang on. Here we are. Gresh. Let's see, rope. Let's pull it up. I think over the rope. Gresh over the rope. Interesting. Actually, you know what? Let's try DuckDuckGo. Google might be suppressing him. Google's suppressing our boy. Let's see. Violet Warrior, mic sounds low. Is my mic low or how are you guys doing? Can you hear me? No. Here we are. Gresh over the rope. Here he is, the one Gresh, Bandcamp. Yeah, this is the guy. So he's like one of the OGs when it came to, and I used his front here for a couple of my streams when I didn't have a thumbnail ready. He's one of the OGs, and he's made music. You know, I'd be curious to hear his opinion on that. Now, I haven't talked to him in a while, but probably he would have the same opinion, that it doesn't really matter what other people think about the music. It's not for them, you know? Even if they enjoy it, and you appreciate if they enjoy it, it's primarily because it's something that, it's an expression of you, you know? I suppose that's kind of a mainstream stereotypical take, you know, oh, it's all about, you know, it's all about what's inside. But that is kind of how it is for these things, in my opinion. And, yeah, anyways, there's one thing that I did want to talk about as well that's more to do with, and I got sidetracked because I was going on to it, and then I wandered off into a tangent, which I am known to do. But I wanted to talk about certain content creators, and they're more recent content creators, and they'll just shovel out this doom slop over and over and over again. It's like, this is why my life sucks, and I'm a loser, and there's no hope for me, and I can barely keep myself from roping, you know, like this sort of stuff. And it'll be like, they'll look at the BP statistics, like they'll look at the data of like, okay, if you're 5'6" and you're ethnic of, like, let's say you're Curry and you're 5'6", you might as well just commit suicide. Your life will never amount to anything meaningful. Like, you'll never find a woman that cares about you. Like, these sort of things, right? And I'd thought about making a video on this, but I'm not sure if it's enough information to make a video on. So I think I'm just going to monologue about it. Like, the BP is more like quantum physics. The BP is not relativity, okay? If in the theory of relativity, if you're calculating something relativistic, if you have the correct data and you input that data into the formula, you will be output an answer that is correct, okay? It's not an approximation, it is correct. Okay, now I know that I'm going to get like egghead autists that come in and say, actually, there's all these problems with relativity and calculations. I don't care about that. The point is that if you're like calculating the coordinates of something and you need to control for time dilation, if you plug in relativistic theory or relativistic formulas like Einstein's like E equals mc squared, you know what I mean? When you plug that stuff in, in order to control for time dilation, you can calculate to a precise degree exactly where something is going to be. Okay? With quantum theory, if you can have all the data and you can plug the data into the formula, and you will not get an exact answer. You will not get a single set of digits with a unit attached to it. You will get a probability. You will get a probabilistic answer that the electron will most likely be in this area at this point in time. That's what you get with quantum theory. It is not determinative. That is the key point. It is not determinative. Okay? And the BP is the same way. So another example. There's approximately a 0.4 correlation between head size and IQ, which means that generally speaking, on a large population scale, the bigger your head, the larger your brain, the higher your IQ. However, this association is such that if you zoom onto an individual level, there are so many other factors that influence your intelligence and also that influence your head size, in theory, ethnic differences, whatever, that once you zoom down to an individual level, the predictive power of a brain size to IQ is effectively zero. Okay? Now, that doesn't mean that the correlation is not real. The correlation is 100% real, but because of how subtle the influence of this correlation is, when you zoom in on this individual level, it breaks down. You cannot use it for anything predictive. And in many cases, the BP is similar in this regard. Okay, so yes, it is correct that if you are below 6 feet, and in particular if you're below 5'8", let's say, your options for dating and relationships will be more limited. Probabilistically, your options are fewer, and your potential of finding an option is smaller than if you are 6 feet tall, or 6'2". Okay, and vice versa. Your options, your probabilistic chances are greater if you are in this above average threshold. Okay, and the same goes for race. Okay, if you are ethnic, if you're curry, if you're rice, okay, this will negatively influence your options. Okay, but if you consider how long the human lifespan is and how many events happen, because you have to remember, you have to almost think of it like a video game. And I know this is a very incel-y way of talking. This is like true cell flag is when you start talking about life like it's a video game. This is proof that you never leave your room, right? But it is true, okay? If like the way that life works is that it's a series of event flags that you trip, and then a dice gets rolled, okay? And every interaction you have in the world is one of these event flags and dice rolls. And it is true that, probabilistically speaking, you will have greater or lesser odds. And knowing what those odds are for who you are, like knowing your statistics, knowing where you place it to the most accurate degree you can, and then placing yourself in the world, that is actually very important, okay? Because that lets you be efficient with how you pursue these events, okay? But what that does not mean is that therefore you can determine that your life will have a certain trajectory just based on these preordained or these pre-existing conditions, okay? And this goes in both the upside and the downside. Like a good example of this is there's a very tight correlation between IQ and income, okay? I could look at this and then I could do an IQ test, and let's say that I score 130 on an IQ test, hypothetically. I could say, well, I have an IQ of 130, and I can clearly see that there's a 1-to-1 correlation between IQ and income. I should have about $120,000 a year coming in. I think I'm just going to sit around and wait for that to happen. Because I know that this is what the data says. This is what's going to happen. I'm just going to continue through my life without trying anything unusual from what I should be doing. And I'm just going to allow things to happen. And I should end up with this outcome. Of course, that's not going to happen. All right? Because the reason why there is a correlation between these two things is because of what these people, because they don't realize that the correlation's there. They just act in the world. And the outcome that is produced is what they get. All right. But again, your life is, the way I put it, your life is like a study. If your case study, the case study is n equals 1. N equals 1. There's only one life that you have. You cannot make correlations, or you cannot make determinations based on that. You can only figure out what your stats are and then prioritize accordingly. Like, there are situations where it's basically over. Okay, if you're like 5'2" and if you're in a wheelchair or whatever, like, okay, there are situations, extreme situations, where it's completely over for you. Okay, but most of us are not in that situation. Okay, most of us are in a situation where our odds are not as good as maybe the median. We're like below median odds, but these are not non-zero odds, right? That's the important thing. And what I feel like these slop posters are doing is they're creating a situation where, especially younger Zoomers, and I guess Gen Alpha coming up, they're going to see this information. Let's say that they're 18 or 16. They're going to see this stuff that, like, actually, you know what? I might as well look up, let's look up loser maxing as an example. Again, I don't have anything personally against this guy, but I don't like the style of these kind of videos where it's like, your life is over before it began because of this. It's different when it's on a personal level. Like, as I said, Blue Skies Media, he was talking about his life as he lived it and his lived experience. That's a bit different. This is like personality doesn't matter. Okay, I mean, that is true. Okay. Let me see here. Yeah, it's like, I'm 37 with less life experience than an average teenager, and all women care about is looks. Like, this sort of stuff, first of all, it's easy, it's low-hanging fruit because everybody already knows this shit, right? But second of all, it generates the impression that if you don't fit these categories, your life is already determined, and it's just not true. It's probabilistically, yes, your odds are less, right? Your odds will be going down relative to, say, clavicular. Okay, so a guy who looks like clavicular. That is true. But that's not the same as saying you don't have any options. And what I feel like, first of all, I think that guys like this are doing this as a means of generating income. Like, I don't think loser maxing is anything as he describes himself. Like, there's a difference between these guys that will do, like, for example, Oreo Man is a really good example. Okay, Oreo Man, he just sits in his car and he does a video and he's like, I want to, like, God hasn't done shit for me. I want to join Satan, and it's like the funniest shit. But he's talking about his own life, and he's obviously not prepping this. Like, he's not making this into a revenue stream. Like, he's just doing it as part of almost like a therapy, right? Whereas this guy, there's very clearly a lot of work put into this, and he knows what he's doing. He's planning this out. And there's something almost predatory to it. Okay. Isn't he the guy that got exposed for being a cell LARP? Who are we talking about? DBDR? Yeah, I don't know much about DBDR. People have told me he's a bit of a lolcow. I mean, he says that, or I've heard that he has, what is it, Klinefelter syndrome, which is 2 X chromosomes and a Y chromosome, and that causes a lot of issues. Which, if he does have that, then I think that's a real issue. That's not a LARP. But I don't know if he has it. That's just what I've heard. But yeah, like I used as an example. And by the way, here's another problem with this. Okay, and this was like the disagreement that I had with Western Decline, where I think what he was doing, like, he would see examples of like short and unattractive Indian guys that would have girlfriends, including white girls, and I also saw situations like that too. But I think what he concluded is like, I need to come up with an alternative theory to explain this outcome. Whereas what I would say is that you don't, like, it's not something that you need to address on a theoretical level. This is probabilistic. There are a certain portion of women, like there are a certain portion of white women that for one reason or another will happen to like and get with sub 5 Indian men. Okay, they exist. Okay, doesn't mean there's many of them. They exist. Probabilistically, they exist. Okay, and you will find guys that get with these girls, and this will be their lucky break, effectively. You know, that's the point that I'm trying to make, is that these situations exist, these outliers, as you might want to call them, exist, and you have to account for them. You can't use the BP as if it's this deterministic formula that you plug numbers into and then you get a predetermined outcome. Okay, it's all just odds. It's odds. That's the bottom line. Basically, women find attractive men who are also smart is even more attractive, not the same as ugly smart men. Kind of. Like, I remember doing some research into this. Yeah, I don't know about loser maxing in particular. As a matter of fact, he was not the one that I was thinking of initially, but I forgot the guy's name. There's another guy who's more recent. He's made a more recent video where he's... I'd have to take a look at my... Discord to find it, but I forget his username. But loser maxing is another example of this kind of like formulaic, it's over videos, and then you think, this seems very strategic. You know, I think that there's a lot of like, this is cynical in my opinion. Okay, I'd be more than happy to interact with him. Like, everyone around me succeeds while I rot. Like, this sort of stuff. You know, I'd be willing to talk to him, and if he wants to prove me wrong, I'd be more than happy to have this conversation, okay? But I have a suspicion that this is just cynical. And basically Mercer's saying we're all going to make it. Well, I wouldn't... See, here's the thing. This goes in the other direction, too. This is like the analogy I made with IQ and income, where it's like, well... The average IQ of like $130,000 career haver is like 120 or something, and that therefore, if you have 120 or higher IQ, you're guaranteed to eventually make $120,000+ a year, and that's not true, right? This is just probabilistic, right? You still have to make the effort. That's the point. And you know, I have to say, to be honest with you, to use myself as an example, I used to be very negatively psyched out about my height. Like, I had real problems with my height, my manletism, and it used to really deeply discourage me as a kid. And to give a little bit of lore on this, so I wasn't a short kid growing up. Growing up, my mid-parental height was predicted to be, like, my mid-parental height, and then with my growth curve, I was predicted to be about 5'11", 5'10.5", 5'11", around there. That was supposed to be my final adult height. And what happened was, when I was in high school, and I was about the same height as the average kid, and there was plenty of kids that were smaller than me too. And I remember when grade 9 rolled around, all these kids shot up around me. All the boys shot up in height around me. Like, suddenly they were a foot taller than me. And it just never happened to me. You know, and I sort of went from being a normal-sized kid to being a short kid. And it really disrupted my sense of self. You know, and I know it sounds kind of whiny in a way, because it's not like I'm super duper short. Like, I'm like 5'7.5". And you know I'm a manlet because I'm using fractions, right? You know I'm a manlet. But, like, that's not the shortest in the world, right? Like, that's, okay, like, that's not like you're going to be doomed based on your height alone at 5'7.5", okay? However, because I went from being, like, eye level with all my peers to suddenly I'm looking at their mouths and their chins are eye level to me, and suddenly I'm smaller than them, and then I'm like the little guy now. Oh man, what was really blackpilling was when I would meet kids that were younger than me, that were like, and that were always smaller than me, a couple years younger, and suddenly they were taller than me, and they would find it really amusing. And man, was that sad. But that really fucked with my head for most of my teen years and also my early 20s. I had a really hard, like, it really hampered my self-esteem, and I never talked about it. Because I felt so embarrassed by it, you know? And as a result, I probably lost a ton of opportunities that were there when I was younger, those doors were closed at that point and never opened again. And this is why I have a problem with this kind of content, because I feel like there will be kids that will see it, and again, they may be suboptimal in whatever ways, but that doesn't mean that you're going to have no opportunities. There's going to be no opportunities to change your situation, you know? And they're going to end up missing those opportunities because they blackpill themselves into a hole, and they never leave that hole until they emerge in like their 30s or something, or their late 20s or whatever, and they realize that they have no experience. They have no life experience. They've gone from being like a little bit behind their peers on these things, maybe, or not even, because I mean, look at Zoomers. Zoomers aren't exactly very sexually active, right? But they go from being a little bit behind their peers to suddenly being in a different world from them and being completely unable to relate to them. You know, like, I kind of think of it in my case, like, if I talk to like a girl who's 28 or whatever, 29, and she's telling me about her like previous relationships and like what she's learned from that or whatever, and it's something that I'm incapable of relating to in any way. You know, like, this is and another thing, and I think this is one of the things that Zoomer kids, like, why they fixate on virginity so much. Like, I've criticized it in the sense that I think it's unrealistic to have virginity as a requirement for women now, because it's just not like you can if you want, but you're not going to get anything. Okay, like, you're basically consigning yourself to celibacy, voluntary celibacy at that point, because you're not getting anything, right? But I'm sympathetic to it, though. Like, I'm sympathetic to the motivation, because you realize that there are all these things that, like, let's say, I call it like the iDubbbz effect, where iDubbbz, you could tell the girl that he married, he completely fell head over heels for this girl, and that's because she was his first, and it was qualitatively a completely different experience for him in a relationship with her, his wife, than how she perceives him, because she has, in her own point of view, her experiences with other men they make it so that there's nothing really unique or special about it. Whereas in his case, it is truly special and truly unique. And I think there's something really tragic about that. Like, it is a genuine tragedy when you know that this man has, like, his subjective experience of how he feels about this woman is qualitatively, it's impossible for her to reciprocate it. You know, there's always going to be that gap, you know, where this is like something that they can never experience together. Like, they'll have a unique experience from his point of view, but not from hers, you know, and it creates power asymmetry as well. So yeah, that's kind of why, even though I make fun of iDubbbz a little bit, at the same time, I feel like he's really a tragic character, because you could tell that he's just completely smitten. Mercer, what about us, which had never had anything to relate with our peers, and thus they were hostile to us as a result? Yeah, I mean, Zoomers are kind of in that category as a group to a much greater extent, because of how online Zoomers are, right? I know that because you guys, like my younger brother, for example, he, and I've mentioned it before, like the way I would play with my friends, I would go outside and play with them. The way he does it, he has friends from school, but he plays online with them on online games, and then he interacts with other kids from other parts of the world, basically, right? From a very young age. Like there was never that sort of local community that got built, and I do think that makes a difference. And you can end up alienated in a way that you wouldn't have been otherwise. You know, maybe you would have been alienated anyways, depending on how different you are from the typical person of your background, right? Capped out at 6'2", just for my one-itis, by really short, which made me self-conscious about being tall. Self-conscious about being tall, you cube, come on. Self-conscious about being tall? That's like a bannable offense, I'm just saying. It's a bannable offense. No, I'm kidding. Loser maxing with somewhat successful marketing degree and career. Yeah, well, there you go, right? DBDR's new channel is called Hat Flying. I don't know, is it any good? I'd be curious about that, actually. Because I've never actually watched anything by DBDR. Because I'm kind of a theoretical guy. I don't really like the personal, like, life stories that are, I want to say sob stories, but a lot of them are sob stories, basically, right? Where these guys will cry about their personal experiences, and sometimes they're relatable, but sometimes they're not, you know? But yeah, anyways, that was a pretty big digression, but I had thought about making a video on the BP and talking about these things. And actually, you know, there is one other thing I wanted to talk about, by the way. This sort of curtails back to Mayo nationalism, I suppose, where there's a lot of talk back and forth that I think is kind of useless air, where they talk about women's preferences when it comes to races of men, and white women in particular. And it's so you'll see guys that will post about how, like white women all prefer white men to a much greater degree than other races. And, you know, I actually say, like, let's grant that as correct. Let's grant that as true. That white women prefer non-white men by, say, 30%, which is usually what you see with these dating statistics. It'll be something like 20, 30% advantage that white men have over men of other races. Okay, but that women are not constrained by race when it comes to choosing a partner, and they're also not constrained by prior partners. And so if a woman has had, like, I don't know, say a woman's had like 5 previous relationships, okay, to put it a bit euphemistically, if she's in a diverse area, even if the white man is 30% more attractive on average than a man of another race, if she's in a relatively diverse area, which most cities are, odds are at least one of those guys is going to not be white. Okay, and for most of the Mayo Nats, what really gets them fixated and what gets them upset is if there's like even one sign of contamination, so to speak. And like the way I look at it, like you got to get over that. If you're really concerned about saving the white race, you have to accept that this is going to be the relationship history of a lot of women, you know? And it annoys me in particular because this is something that ethnic men have to accept. Like if you're a rice cell in America, you accept as the default norm, because it's a very good assumption to make, that any Asian American girl that you could potentially have a relationship with probably has had some romantic or otherwise interaction with a white man, okay, or any other race of man. Typically it's white, but it's not always, you know, just probabilistically that's what will happen. You just have to accept that as part of the reality, and you have to fit that into your self-conception in a way. Like you have to come to terms with it. That's my point. And to some extent, this is also true for black men when it comes to like genuinely attractive black women. Like if a black woman's like a Naomi tier, she's like 7+ out of 10. odds are she's probably not exclusively dated black men. Okay. You have to accept that as a reality. Right. But whites, they just get so worked up about it. And I just find it kind of strange because this is just the norm when you're living in a liberal system. Like, yeah, we don't have any means of preventing defection. Okay. Like, and this is, by the way, this is what's going to show up in one of my videos that I'm making. I'm still finishing the script on it, but I'm comparing communities and like how some communities are resilient while others are not. Pakistanis in the UK are resilient. And the reason why Pakistanis in the UK are resilient is because they can punish defection. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that what they do is a good thing in terms of ethical behavior or whatever. Like what they will do, Pakistanis will do in the UK, is like if a Paki woman gets caught with a non-Muslim man, typically a white man, but it could be black, could be anything, she's liable to, at minimum, get ostracized from her family and kicked out of her family, at minimum. And it can escalate from there. She could get acid thrown at her face. She could get murdered. Okay, like it's a very dangerous ordeal to defect from the Muslim communities. Okay, and as a consequence of this, they are able to, even though they're a low status group, okay, like Pakis in the UK are a low status group. They're relatively poor. They're economically marginal. They're culturally marginal. Muslims don't have real cultural influence. Like nobody looks at the guys walking around in their outfits in Birmingham or whatever, the goofy outfits and crazy beards, and they think, "Wow, I really want to be that." Like this is a community that I feel I want to strive to be a part of. Like nobody thinks that way. Yet they are able to perpetuate themselves. They're able to reproduce their population, increase their population demographically, and wield political influence, which is what they're doing right now. Okay. Well, that goes to show that if you are able to prevent defection of women, that is the means to which you can contend politically in the American or English, like any other liberal system. And the reason why whites and also blacks, because like even though I was talking about Chud the Builder initially and how black criminality is utilized to attack whites, blacks in and of themselves are not given. It's not like blacks have some cultural power in and of themselves. Like if blacks cross the wrong people, they get crushed. Okay, like look at what happened to Kanye. Okay, Kanye made N-word Hail Hitler, and look what happened to him. Right? He lost billions of dollars. He was ostracized from the mainstream media. There's another guy, Nick Cannon. Nick Cannon, he would do content about how white people are subhuman or whatever. Like he was doing like the Black Hebrew Israelite thing, like white people are subhuman. And that's okay. But Nick Cannon started talking about Jews and how the Jews aren't the real Jews and blacks are actually the real Jews. And it was almost like what I was talking about with the CCP disappearing billionaires. Nick Cannon suddenly got disappeared, and then he showed up with a rabbi being instructed on Jewish religious law. He was wandering around with his rabbi. Like, that's what happens. Okay, if you're black and you step on the wrong toes. Okay, so blacks in the U.S., they only have power to attack groups that are sanctioned to be attacked. They don't have any other real power, okay? But at the same time, like whites cannot reproduce ourselves because we cannot prevent our women from defecting, and there are a lot of incentives for our women to defect, okay? Just based on being included in the progressive stack due to feminism. So they can sort of obviate their whiteness. They can redirect away from themselves their guilt of whiteness by identifying as a feminist and identifying white men as an enemy group and framing things in terms of man versus woman, except when it's like a white woman versus a non-white man conflict. Okay, then they just look the other way. Like that's the agreement that the feminists have, and even though that's an unstable agreement, it's still better than what white men have to deal with, which is basically if you're a white man and you want to join the progressive group, you basically have to join as an enemy. Like it's equivalent to being like a house slave in the South, you know. And really, actually, what's funny about it is that in terms of the legal outcomes, there's a lot of resemblance with how not just whites, but to a large extent, whites are treated legally as how blacks were treated before civil rights, like during Jim Crow. Like the civil rights movement, the arguments or the grievances that blacks had during civil rights were valid. They were legitimate. Okay, like they were being discriminated against. They were not being treated fairly in terms of the legal system. Like there was a general prejudice towards them in public life, and legally speaking. Now, that's not to say that like lynchings, for example, there were lynchings that were legit in the sense that they were for crimes that if a white person had done it, he would have been lynched as well. Okay, that was true. But there were also cases where it was contrived or where it was false and it was based on a lie, but racial animus allowed violence to be inflicted against the blacks. Well, it's kind of a very similar but inverted situation with whites. I mean, it's not quite as dramatic as the pre-civil rights South, where there wasn't really that much of a rule of law. You know, things were a lot less politically stable. But there is a situation where there's a two-tiered system. You know, and it's used in a political fashion to attack the white population due to the white population's threat. All right, that's true. But where was I going with this? But despite that, so even though blacks do have this utility in the system, they are still facing the same problem with defection that whites are. Black men cannot prevent black women from defecting. And by defecting, I mean, for example, the divester movement, you know, where black women, if they have an option that is not a black man, if they have an option other than a black man, they can go for that option and there's no penalty. There's no punishment for it, right? There's no way of preventing that. And what this results in, this creates an environment where black men are, the way that they cope with this is that they identify black women as like low status. They lower the appraisal of black women among black men. They devalue black women because this softens the wound from defection. So this is why when a non-black woman is like Pearly Things, for example, when Pearly Things comes up and she criticizes black women on the side of black men, as a white woman, she will have like parades thrown in her name. Okay, like she will instantly get a huge following of black men because black men, this is like a loyalty signal that goes out. That is because Pearly Things is defecting from the white male population to black men. This is seen as a very sincere demonstration of loyalty to black men. And the same logic happens for white men, okay? White men, you'll see this meme. There was this, I was looking for this stone toss meme where it's this like it's the 4 panels for stone toss, and it has like a Nazi pointing a Tommy gun at a guy, and he has his hands up, and he says, "Wait, don't shoot me. I'm a neo-Nazi like you." And then he says, "Oh yeah, prove it." And then it's like a poll post where it's like white women are all race traitor slags, Asian women are so much more feminine and superior. And then the guy wipes his brow like, "Oh yeah, he's definitely one of us." Like this is a meme that is real. Okay, is that there is this impression that white men have where they'll devalue white women in order to cope with their inability to prevent defection. You know, if white women are highly valued, if white men put out the impression that white women are very valuable to them and that they're very important, but white women defect, what that indicates, it's like that reflects as like that white men are very low value. Right? Because if you have a woman as very high value in your eyes and she defects from you anyways, that shows that she doesn't care how nicely you think about her. Right? So the defensive mechanism is, again, to reduce the appraisal of the woman, to lower her value in your own conscious eyes. It's like a subconscious thing. But the problem is that this results in a situation where the group can't reproduce itself. Like, black men cannot, if you're concerned about reproducing blackness, like there are like famous athletes, black athletes, and then you'll see they'll have grandkids 20 or 30 years later, and the grandkids will be like a quarter or like 1/5 black and the rest is white, because they had a kid with a white woman, and then their kid had a kid with a white person, and therefore their grandkids are basically effectively white, or they're very close to being white. Next generation, they're going to be indistinguishable from white. Okay, at that point, your group is disappearing. So if you actually care about being black, this is a problem, okay? Because you end up allowing black women to defect because you lower their value, because that you know that they can defect, and then you accept women into your group that are from outside of your group. Eventually, your group just disappears as a coherent racial block. Okay, and again, the same thing happens to whites. You have all these white, like I think there was this thing about what's his name, Eric Orwell, his Return to the Land, where he had to put out a PSA about all these white nationalists that wanted to move to his compound, but they had like Asian and Hispanic wives. And he's like, you're not coming here if you don't have a white wife. This is a white compound. And it was so funny because it's so true. Like, this is the problem that you run into if you are following this strategy of you can't prevent defection, so you just abandon your own racial in-group and you just accept women from racial out-groups that demonstrate, like, put out signals of loyalty to you. You cannot maintain the racial group. The integrity collapses. You have to come up with some other way to define your group at that point. You know? And the question is then, what do you do with that? And I know that in my previous stream, I brought up that video by Megha Verma, or whatever her name is. And I was talking about how, like, I don't think that her strategy is going to work. Because their strategy is like, they're basically off-white / ethnic women that are trying to, like, trad max and poach white men from, like, the what's the term? Like, dispossessed, alienated, far-right faction of white men. Like, they're trying to get in on that and poach white men from that faction and maybe hijack it and eliminate the racial element from it. Initially, I was like, I don't think this is going to work strategically, just because, like, the racial element is a really strong in-group signaler. But I'm actually not so sure now, because, like, unless you're, as I said, unless you're like a Pakistani, unless you're the Pakistani community, you are not able to reproduce your group because you can't prevent your women from going to outgroup men. You know, oh, you send a super chat. Oh, let me take a look here. Oh, can you see me now? Oh, hang on. Okay, sorry about that, guys. I must have fallen behind here. Let me catch up on the super chats. Sorry about that. So Feltree sent $3.33. White women definitely prefer white men, but IMO, it's mostly because they know the ins and outs of our psychology and know how to manipulate us the best to get as much out of us as possible as providers. You know, I do honestly, I can tell you just from interacting, I know this is like fake cell alert. I didn't actually get anything out of it, but I have interacted substantially with women of different races and also white women. I have to say, and also, like, not just white, but also foreign versus, like, born in America for the most part, or in Canada. I have to say that there is something to familiarity, to being able to talk with somebody, and there are fewer presumptions that, or there are more presumptions that you can make about the woman, like what her beliefs are, like what she finds funny, like the world events that she can understand on the same level that you can. I do think, like, you could call it coping. I do think there's a certain value to that compared to a woman that's completely foreign. And it doesn't even have to be a race thing. Like, it could be a European woman who is from Germany, let's say. Genetically speaking, I might be very close to her, but we have a very different experience of life because they're completely different cultures, you know, and we don't have the same cultural reference points. I think that plays a role, like, and I think for a lot of white women, I do think that white women or women in general, they have more of a desire for comfort and security than men do. Like I think men were able to tolerate a lot of insecurity, and like not insecurity in the sense of like she's going to cheat on you or something, but we're able to tolerate a lot more unpredictability and unfamiliarity, I think. White women and women in general, they tend to be more security oriented and more anxious and more in need of reassurance. And I think that is why women tend to be, in general, more loyal to their in-group than men. That's, I think, a major factor that we have to consider. Maybe I'm just trying to be, as charitable as possible. I'm a huge fan of steel manning. I think if you're going to challenge anyone on your point of view, you need to steel man them. You need to make sure that you give their viewpoint as honest and as positive a depiction as possible in order for you to really successfully knock it down. So that's what I'm trying to do here. I think that's an element. And can you see me now? Let me read what you said here. You can't have that relational gap with women unless you have money for security. Most men want virgin women because there is less risk involved than a woman that's had a relationship with 3 guys. Low number. Yes, it is a risk analysis, right? It is, and statistically, look, we all know the statistics. We've all seen the statistics about the degree of, like, the likelihood of a successful marriage based on premarital partners. 100% true. And men really do make a cost-benefit analysis. They make a security analysis. Like, I remember, I think I brought it up in a previous stream where I remember I lived at one point near a set of new houses that were built. And in my experience going through that neighborhood back and forth, I saw a lot of older millennials. They would be in their 40s now, I guess. But at the time, they were in their early 30s. And they were with these women, and they were all white, by the way. Everyone involved was white. There was no non-whites in this situation, just so that there's no confusion. But their wives, because they would usually have wives and kids, but their wives were noticeably, in my opinion, less attractive than what they could have attracted. And it occurred to me that most likely what's happening here is that they don't just want to attract a woman that they could reasonably retain with effort. They want to attract a woman who is the best option that she would ever have, or he would be her best option, because then you are basically secure from her taking off, because these are guys that were married with kids. These are not guys that are just dating women, right? So that's my suspicion, is that like men are very security oriented when we're making long-term decisions, right? Well, then why do Eastern European women betray their men for basically every other race? Well, actually, let me catch up on some of the posts here. William Luther Pierce is right. Look, his book was really boring, but it was kind of interesting. And he was actually a really good speaker. He was a good public speaker. I would suggest, look, even if you're not white and you don't care about the politics, even just listening to one of William Luther Pierce's speeches where he talks, he's really enjoyable to listen to in terms of his voice and his cadence. So if you want to, well, it's not really ASMR, but like he would have been a good public speaker if he was around today. Though his beliefs are they're very outdated in my opinion. Like he was worried about Hispanics at the time, and I'm like, man, listen, if you thought Hispanics were a problem, you ain't got nothing. You got another thing coming, because Hispanics are really not a big issue. Okay, they are disruptive. They are disruptive. Okay, but they're not going to end your civilization. Okay, there are other groups that can end your civilization, not Hispanics. Anyways, Arab/Muslim Asians are a lot more immune to this, but in the future you'll definitely see more white men with Hispanics, blacks, other Asians, and the like. Yeah, Yakub, you're right. Well, in Islam, there was actually a statistic that I saw recently out of Russia, not Russia, it's out of Kazakhstan. And it was about the mate choice of Russian women and Kazakh women and other groups of women based on whether they had a baby with a man of their ethnicity or not. And for context, Kazakhs make up about 72% of Kazakhstan's population, and Russians make up about 15% of Kazakhstan's population. But if you look at the birth statistics, Russian women had babies with 36% of the babies to Russian women were from men that are not ethnically Russian in Kazakhstan. And given that the only significant minorities are Russians, and then there's the Kazakh majority. Russians are the only significant minority. Then after that, it's like Ukrainians at 2% or something. And then there's a couple other Central Asian groups. 36% of Russian babies to Russian women in Kazakhstan are to non-Russian men. Most of those are probably to Kazakh men. Okay, and for Kazakh women, it was only like 2.6% of babies to Kazakh women are to non-Kazakh men. And again, that's not even necessarily Russian men. That could be to it could be other Central Asian Muslims, right? The point being, like, if you do the math on this, I worked it out, is that there's like 3 times as many, if we assume the numbers are correct, there's at least 3 times as many Russian women having babies with Kazakh men than Russian men having babies with Kazakh women. There's that big of a differential in Kazakhstan. And to me, that indicates what I was saying before, that, and I remember I got into a long conversation on X with Cognizant Manlet about it, because Cognizant Manlet is of the position, and actually, to be honest with you, I used to share this position. I've sort of shifted somewhat from it, where white women, just due to their preference, like their aesthetic preferences, they're not going to defect based on that. Even if the status of white men shifts, they're just going to be femcel, basically. They're just not going to reproduce. But then I've started to change my opinion based on some of the data that I've seen, where I think status plays a huge role. Status plays a huge role when it comes to mate selection for women. And that doesn't necessarily mean that like 5'2" Indian janitors are suddenly going to become attractive with Swedish women if Indians take over Sweden. Okay, that's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that the numbers will get tilted in one direction or the other based on that status boost. So, for example, you might get a 1 or 2 point bonus, if you want to think of it that way, if you are the dominant culture in a given country, versus if you're a minority culture that does not have significant influence, that is not like an elite culture. You will lose some points, so to speak. Even if on an aesthetic level, the dominant culture is less attractive. Is what I'm saying, is that status, for women in particular, status in and of itself has some value to it, right? So the idea that there's like an instinctive loyalty of any group of women, not just white women, but any group of women, is just not correct, you know? And I mean, we've seen it demonstrated with non-white women in white countries, okay? That they're very willing to defect to the dominant culture. And again, like, one of the funny things is that you see, oh, I got a super chat. Hang on. Feltree. WLP was definitely right about the white middle class if he's right about anything. Oh, 100%. Yeah, he called them lemmings. I remember he did a video on lemmings, and that is exactly, like, you know how we were talking about normies and how they don't really have any sense of the future or any sense of the past. They can't integrate anything. So they just exist in this perpetual present, and they're just like pursuing their immediate gratification. 100%. That is the lemming as described by William Luther Pierce. Anyways, though, like we've seen with other groups of women, other races of women, that they have no problem defecting if their group of men is not in the dominant culture, you know? Whereas it's not so obvious when they are a dominant culture, you know? So that plays a big role, I think. Anyways, where's your stream with Hoka? I messaged Steve, and because I actually want to clip that stream myself. I thought it was a really good stream. I really enjoyed the the stream, but he still hasn't put it up, I don't think. I don't know what the delay is about. He says that he's concerned about the that the stream is going to get taken down or something, but I don't think that's how it works. Like, it doesn't matter whether the stream is private or not. If the automated sensors identify you as a saying naughty words, they'll shut you down. It doesn't matter. You could be let me see here. Yeah, no, it's still not up. I don't know, that's annoying. Yeah, I got to talk to him about that, because there's a lot of really good clippable stuff in there. I was going to clip a few bits of those streams, his stream where I was talking, because I had some great opportunities. What's this? Balding Indian janitors hold high SMV than white males to white liberal women. See, I'm not quite so sure about that. Not quite so sure about that. I wouldn't make that claim. I will say, though, that you can go from like a 3 to a 4, or a 4 to a 5 if you have if you're part of the dominant culture. And I do think that Asian women with white men, if you like, it's kind of a meme, right? It's a notorious meme that you'll see really subhuman white men with Asian women. And they would be, they're willing to, it's not just that white men are aesthetically more pleasing, right? Like, there are Asian women that will date white men that are objectively less attractive than the kind of Asian man that they could attract, right? That tells you that there's a status element attached to it. It's not just about aesthetics, right? And it's true for any group, you know. I don't even think that this is an anti-white woman position either. This is just a statement of reality, I think. Probably, and you know what? You could probably even make the same argument about men. Because for example, I've seen situations where attractive black men will get with white women that are less attractive than the kind of black woman that they could get because she's a white woman. And there's like a status boost associated with that. So it's not just about women either. Like, men can play this game too. You know? Anytime I go on vacation in Europe with my GF and we do tour guides, there's always a Becky American woman with Pajit BF. Oh, Alex Prince, well, first of all, you have a GF. That's like a bannable offense. So, no, I'm kidding. Becky American woman with Pajit BF. Well, you know what? If he's got money and he's able to take her to Europe, well, there's probably a class element to that as well. But typically the way it works with Indians is they'll try their luck with a local woman, and if they can't get a white woman, an American woman, they will default to an Indian woman and just import one. But like, if you look at the sex ratio of H-1Bs into America, it's like 70% male or 80% male from India. Like, they always send their men to attempt to colonize. And if the colonization is unsuccessful, if they cannot get a white woman, that's when they import a woman from India. And this is why the interracial marriage statistics are a little misleading, because you'll see like Indian men are, I think it's like 10% more likely than Indian women to have a non-Indian marriage partner. And that gets disrupted again by the fact that once the H-1Bs settle down and they get their green card, they can import, or even like when they're on the H-1B, I believe legally speaking, they can import a woman and marry her, right? So they have the ability to try first, and then if they fail, they can import a woman from India. Whereas because the Indian women are mostly not the ones arriving first, they cannot do the same. So there's an asymmetry there. And as a matter of fact, this is another interesting thing. You see this with East Asians as well, to some extent. Now, East Asians aren't coming over on H-1Bs as much as they used to. It's more of like nowadays they're more of an embedded group. Like, most of the East Asians came over in the 90s and 2000s. I mean, they are still coming over on student visas, but the point is, for Asian men, there is still, to a substantial degree, the option to import a woman from, say, China or from Korea or, Japan, whatever. Like, they can still import a woman from their home country if they are of marriageable age and they're prepared financially for marriage, but they don't have the option to get a white woman or some local woman, or not just a white woman, an Asian American woman as well. So that is an option. And Feltry sent me another. Oh, Feltry, you're great today. Thank you very much, Feltry. I know it's kind of gauche to say, but wait. You know, when you typed gauche, I just thought of that. Did you guys, any of you see that video of the guy who wrote down a bunch of words and included gauche in it? It was like a sentence that was very elaborate, and then he had a bunch of black kids try and read it, high school kids, and none of them could. They like would fuck it up all the time. Every time I read gauche, that's what I think of. Anyways, it's kind of gauche to say, but white women truly are the Jews of gender because they're just kind of amoral opportunists, and it's hard to justify hating them for just being in a better position alone when we facilitated it by simping for centuries. Yeah, 100, well, I remember I made a stream on this, the Evo-Psych history of Europeans. I didn't like how I went about that, to be honest with you, because it was kind of sloppy. Like that was a topic that should be done on a video because it requires a lot more detail, I think, and it requires a lot more precision because you are right. In terms of like how did we end up where we are? I don't think it was because we actively were simping for women or white women. I think that because of the aristocratic nature of the early Indo-Europeans, like dignity became a core element of European identity. Like being dignified became this critical component of what it meant to be a European. And originally it started with just the aristocratic elite men, where it was like the council. Again, there was this book I read called the Kitab al-Itibar. I've referenced it before. And one of the passages in the book describes a situation where there's like a ransom of a knight, and the king is negotiating the ransom. And this is from the Arab aristocrat perspective. And the king goes to his round table of knights, and he has this apprehensive look, like he really is hoping that they'll approve of his negotiation. And then when they do approve of it, he is greatly relieved. And the Arab found this to be really baffling, because he was like, how is it that these hired knights, basically, because the way it worked in the Muslim world is that the retinue that would be equivalent to knights were basically slaves. They were called mamluks. And they were the personal slaves of the sultan, the king of the Muslim realm. So these were not, now they had a higher status than commoners. They were technically a kind of nobility, but they were slaves. Like they did not legally have any rights, and they were bound to obey the sultan on pain of death. They had like no sway formally over the sultan. And the aristocrat was like, why is it that the king has his knights have so much influence over him? And again, this is what I'm talking about. This is like this instinctive sense of decentralized power and pride and dignity of the aristocratic class. And eventually what happened over time is that this became universalized, because there's another element in European culture, which is the individualism and universalism element, which that's a whole different rabbit hole to go down. I've also talked about that. But if you combine these two elements, eventually you start spreading this concept of innate dignity to more and more sectors of the population over time, until you start encompassing, now it's not just the aristocratic elite men, now it's all men. And then it's not just the aristocratic elite men, it's also the elite aristocratic women by their connection to aristocracy. Like by their connection to noble blood, the women also have this innate dignity to them that is conferred on them by their lineage. But then over time, that becomes universalized, where it's not just because of their lineage, it's also because of they're women of the community, of the nation. And eventually you get to a point where feminism becomes inevitable, because it's feminism is all about asserting women's individual rights. You know, that women are dignified just like men. Women have the right to choose the trajectory of their lives and not be dominated by men. Like this is the logic that comes from that, is what I'm saying. I'm not even making a value judgment about it. I'm just saying like that's the ultimate conclusion. And when you start from the position of like Islam is the exact opposite. Islam is like slavery is built into the system, where it's like Abdallah is one of the most popular names. Okay, what does Abdallah mean? Abdallah means you are the slave of Allah, right? And by the way, I'm very proud that I can pronounce that that ah sound. That's apparently that's very hard for non-Arabs to do. I picked it up once a long time ago. But anyways, Abdallah is basically slave of Allah, and that's one of the most common names in the Muslim world. You know, like slavery is hardwired culturally into Islam, and therefore it's much harder for Muslim women to justify independence, cultural independence from Muslim men, and in the culture, than for Europeans. And East Asia, very similar. Confucian culture, women were almost not even included in Confucian culture when you do genealogies. Like, women would be referred to as the wife of so-and-so. They would not even be referred to as an individual person. They would always be attached to a man. Like, these are very different ways of organizing culture. This is the unique thing about European culture, is this individualism and aristocratic dignity. And it just inevitably results in that. Anyways, let me see here. Feltry sent another one. Thank you very much. I always see the white woman / Indian guy relationship as kind of a sponsorship dynamic and nothing to do with desire. That's where I think Western decline is wrong. Well, you know what's funny about that, Feltry? Okay, here's story time. Okay, this is during the end tail of COVID, okay? If you guys remember, when COVID was formally over with and all the mask mandates and everything stopped, everyone had taken, like where I had lived at the time, it was a fairly, by Canadian standards, conservative area. Everybody had already taken their masks off. They were done with this shit. But by the time that I was in this Walmart, formally speaking, the mask mandates were gone. All of this was gone. There was one exception that I saw when I was in the Walmart. And there was this white woman, and actually, I have to admit, she was a fairly pretty white woman too. And she was young. She was like maybe 20, 21, 22. And she had her mask on, and she was being followed around by this Indian guy who was also on the short side, shorter than I was actually. And well, he looked like some kind of northern Indian, but he kind of had a wide head. Anyways, like, he wasn't very attractive. That's the point. And he had a mask on as well. They were the only two people in that entire Walmart wearing a mask. And I was like, I wonder where he got the idea to wear a mask from. I'm sure it was him that was suggesting that they're going to walk around looking ridiculous, being the only people in the supermarket wearing a mask. Like, actually, no, probably what happened there is she's like a super liberal, ultra liberal, and she's demanding that they wear masks because COVID is this infinitely mutating and eternal virus that's going to kill us all, and he's just going along with it because like that meme about Nick Fuentes where he does the Ben Shapiro thing. That's kind of this guy. That's how it felt. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm willing to say, I have seen situations where it seems like this woman just happened to like this guy regardless of his own features or his own background. I don't think that was an example of that. So let me catch up on the live chat here. C-maxing still works for white men in 2026. Allegedly, I think the biggest issue is economic problems, right? Because one of the ways that geomaxers used to be able to support themselves would be through like working as like a teacher, let's say, or some other remote work, like remote tutoring is another example. That's dependent because these are not necessary industries. You don't need to have an English tutor. It's a service that's like a not really a luxury, but it's like it's an additional service. It's not necessary. It's not a necessity. And as a result, in bad economic times, like now, a lot of these places, the people are pulling back. Like I guarantee you, most of the tutors, if you were doing online tutoring a couple of years ago, most of the kids that you were tutoring were Chinese. Okay, well, China is going to be facing due to the crunch that's happening across Asia. There's going to be a major drop in demand for Chinese goods, and this in turn is going to cause harm to the Chinese economy, and this is going to cause a lot of people to avoid spending money that they otherwise would have. And this will include something like English tutoring. So your main issue at this point now is that you're running out of options to support yourself if you're abroad, unless you already have a remote job, which some guys do. And there was one guy, French-Canadian guy, who he has like a customer service job, and the hours are Eastern Standard Time, but he works from the Philippines. He's married to a Filipino woman and has a daughter. And he works from the Philippines Eastern Standard Time hours, but because of the amount that he makes doing this customer service in French, it's like a real comfortable standard of living. So there are options like that if you can find them, I suppose, in theory, but it's not like what it used to be. Like your major barriers are economic at this point. And let me see here. In your opinion, why did Zog choose Indians as the main race to import across Western countries? You know who actually did a really good... hang on one sec, though. Sorry, one sec. Just checking to make sure I didn't miss any super chats. There's this really good... actually, you know what? I'll read it. Hang on. There's a really good post on this by... what's her name? Slatzism. I'll see if I can pull it up here. Pagliacci the Hated, that's it. Even though she's a feminist, gotta give credit where it's due. Let me see here. Let me find it. Okay, here we are. I found it. I'll read it out because honestly, this is one of the best explanations. It's a bit harsh on the Currys, but I think that there's truth to it. I think she nails it. So let's read it. Just one second. Sorry about the delay here. It's taking a while. Here we are. Why are there Indians in Portugal? And the answer, because they are good slaves. You are not. I hate essay posting, but allow me a rare indulgence. To understand what is happening now, you need to understand that this isn't the first time it's happened. Why are there Indians in Kenya, Suriname, Fiji, Burma? Because Indians have always been the preferred servile class of elites. The evidence for this goes back hundreds of years. I've spoken about British colonial Burma before, and it's a great example of what this looks like. Actually, Burma is something that I should have talked about in previous, because that's a really perfect example of economically motivated migration. Anyways, let me scroll down a little bit. I've spoken about British colonial Burma before, and it is a great example of what this looks like. Even after extensive efforts to bring them to heel, the majority of the Burmese ethnic groups were far too resistant to submit to the British Empire to be reliable labor. They refused to abandon their culture and ways of life to be slave drones for the British pocketbooks. So the Brits started importing Indians to be their colonial administrators, preferring them as labor because they were easier to control and satisfy. By the 1940s, Indians made up 20% of the population of the entire country. Another great historical example of this is Suriname, a small country in South America that has been under Dutch colonial rule for 300 years. The Dutch abolished slavery in 1863, forcing colonial plantation owners to hire labor to do the work they had previously been using slaves for. But they didn't want to pay the former slaves or indigenous locals a living wage for work. So what did the Dutch elites do instead? Import Indians. Today, Indians make up 27% of the population. We could go through the list of every country with a non-negligible Indian population and the theme would be consistent. They were brought there by elites who need submissive, easily exploitable labor pool, when local labor asked for better living conditions or wages. Why? Because Indians never did. They're a population that seems fully content with subjugation. Even Marx noted this. It's easy to see why they were such an ideal population for intensive global expansion era of colonial empires, and it's even easier to see why they are the perfect subjects for late capitalism now. They're the culturally, psychologically, and physically ideal organism for the dominant system. There's 1.4 billion of them. They are deeply socially stratified and so expect and even enjoy inequality. Their cuisine is cheap, meat-free slop. So that's a little bit harsh. I actually think Jeet slop is quite good. I'm a Jeet slop enjoyer, to be honest with you. It's probably my English ancestry filtering through. Anyways, they live amongst trash and filth with no qualms. They don't care about the environment. Their reaction to death and abuse is blank-eyed indifference. They are physically and spiritually malleable. They not only adopt and internalize the demands of the dominant system as personal ambition, they believe this servitude makes them better than everyone else who hasn't. Absolutely ideal subjects. You, on the other hand, are not the ideal subject. You want to live in a high-trust society. You would shed tears if someone tried to cut down the apple tree you climbed as a child to build a data center. You want to see and experience beauty. You want your own space. You have an expectation that your living conditions will improve over time. You would not be content to live in a room with 10 other people, work 16 hours a day for pennies, and eat cheap slop. You are a liability just like the Burmese and Surinamese slaves were. And I think most of this is just, now it's just invective about it. But she really laid it out. Like, that is actually correct. There was this post, I remember, from a book. Like, it was posted on 4chan. But it was from a book that was written about, by the British concerning Indians in Kenya. And the description was, like, effectively that Kenyans were not willing to tolerate the conditions of work that the British demanded. The Indians would serve as a more malleable middleman. And they also said some interesting things, like the British at the time were writing that it was almost like a noble savage sort of thing, where they were talking about the moral corruption of Kenyans, which I know that nowadays there's this idea like blacks are horrible in terms of their morality. You know, I'm not going to get into that. The English at the time believed that the Kenyans were being morally corrupted by the influence of Indian economic practices. Like, it was almost like a noble savage thing. They had a traditional pastoral way of living, and this was being disrupted by the Indian usurers that were brought in, money lenders, among other things. This is something that people don't realize is there was actually mass expulsions of Indians out of African countries after independence, and the mass expulsions were largely driven by money lending, because this is one of the ways that Indians would make a lot of money in African countries. They would do money lending. They'd do usury. You know, and by the way, this kind of creates another element of why is this group disliked? Well, Indians were lending money, and then they eventually got expelled out of the countries they were lending money in. Okay, Jews were lending money, and we all know what happened to them in Europe. Do you know what Armenians were doing in? Do you know what Armenians were doing in the late Ottoman Empire? Any hints? Any guesses? Do you have any guesses as to what the Armenians were doing near the end of the Ottoman Empire? We have some guesses in the chat. History doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes. Yep, that's true. 1492 maxing. No, they were lending money. Armenians actually beat out the Jews in the Ottoman Empire for money lending. The Greeks were the primary business class. Greeks were kind of like the Indians of the Ottoman Empire. They were or Asians. They were highly active in the economic sphere, but they weren't really active in money lending. Armenians were like the Jews of the Ottoman Empire. They were heavily involved in banking, and they actually outcompeted the Jews. In that they actually drove the Jews economically out of the country, or drove their banks and their businesses out. And well, what preceded that? I mean, what's funny is I remember reading this somewhere, and because there's this discussion, you always see America being compared to Rome, right? The reality is there's actually a much better comparison. is comparing America to the Ottoman Empire and how it's structured, because the Ottoman Empire had this sort of rural class of peasants, basically, that were Turkish, that were not represented by the system. And then you had all these elite minorities in the urban areas: Greeks, Armenians, Jews, other groups, religious minorities. There was there's a branch of Shia Islam that is practiced in Turkey called Alevi Islam, and it's basically like a libtard version. It's like for Shias, it's Unitarianism, basically. Like they're like hyper libtard Turks. And oh, hang on, I got another tip from Feltree. Well, thank you very much, Feltree. Would love to see you do a stream on Ottomanism and the Ottoman Empire in general, because that's the actual parallel to America, not Rome like people want to believe. Yeah, maybe I will, actually. That's not really a super pressing topic, I suppose, but it is something that could be talked about. That would be more like a deep dive. I could definitely do that, though. I'd actually really enjoy that. Because anyways, just to continue on that a little bit, you had this sort of underclass of Turks. They weren't really an underclass in the sense like they were slaves, but they were underrepresented. Like they were impoverished. They were generally illiterate. They were ignored by the Ottoman Empire except when they needed to fight wars. And then they would recruit the Turks to fight wars. And what a shock. The Ottoman Empire, by the end of it, by the late Empire period, the Ottoman Empire actually sucked ass. Like their soldiers, for the most part, sucked ass. Okay, and that's because the Turks had no reason to fight, right? And then what did Ataturk do? Well, this sort of gives you a hint as to what this eventual solution will be for America, because like by the end of the Ottoman Empire, when it was collapsing, you had a government that was captured by these market-dominant minorities and that had no representation with the common population that staffed the military. And then you had a rogue general during the last war that couped the government and established a secular republic and imposed Turkishness, because Ataturk, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, did not, he wasn't like a racial nationalist or whatever, right? Like what he looked at was more like the French Revolution as a model. Not the French Revolution in terms of like the leftists. I mean like the French version of nationalism, cultural nationalism. That's what he looked at as the solution. And so he imposed Turkification. Like he made everyone have to change their names to a Turkish name. And if you refused to do this, and if you refused to convert to Islam, you were kicked out. This is where the massive population transfers happened, where a lot of Greeks and, of course, the Armenians experienced the Armenian genocide. That did happen. It was basically a death march to Armenia. And, there's no justification for it. You can look, there's no justification for what happened to the Jews during World War II, okay? I mean, it's like you can't, there's no justification for exterminating populations, whether it's deliberately planned or if it happens as a consequence of what you're doing. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just trying to describe the conditions that resulted in this, right? And so the Armenians got driven into Armenia through basically death marches. It was, very gruesome. And the end result is that like when Ataturk controlled the borders, he was able to impose Turkishness. Like if you were caught speaking a language other than Turkish, you were beaten. You weren't just arrested, you were beaten physically. And he banned the fez. The fez, you couldn't wear the fez anymore, which is a symbol of Ottomanism. And Turkification of all the names. Like, could you imagine this in America? Could you imagine, like, if you were caught speaking anything other than English in America, you were beaten, and Juan Gonzalez had to change his name to, like, John Gosar or something? Like, you'd have to change your name to some American-sounding, Anglo-sounding name, and if you were caught speaking Spanish or anything, you'd be beaten. I don't even know if it would be possible nowadays, because the reason why it worked in Turkey was because they didn't have any real way to interact with each other outside of in person. So as long as you impose those restrictions on people, eventually by necessity they would assimilate. I don't even know if you could do that now, because you can't even separate people from their original homelands anymore. If you think about it. Because, anybody who's arriving as an immigrant now, they can interact with people back in their home just through the internet, And on top of that, they can interact with each other online. There's no way to police it anymore. Yeah. This is what Slovaks and Romanians did to Hungarians after the First World War. The First World War was pretty brutal for Hungary. I mean, it's that entire superstate just got dismembered into. Look, I know that because I've talked to Slovaks, I've talked to other smaller ethnic groups in the former Austro-Hungarian Empire. Like, there's the element of you're sort of a second-class citizen, even if you're on paper you have the same rights. In terms of your culture, you are sort of playing second fiddle to the dominant culture, which would be German and Hungarian at the time. So there is that. Like, that's an understandable issue. But at the same time, you look at the consequences of dismembering these states, these like larger super states. Like a perfect example of this is Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia, you can make arguments that the Serbs were behaving like they were abusing their dominant position, sure. But now all of those countries are just irrelevant. They're just, at best, I think Slovenia and Croatia are able to survive as tourist locations for Germans and for other, larger European populations. They can go there as tourists for a cheap tour, for a cheap tropical vacation, not tropical, but cheap Mediterranean vacation. All these other countries, Serbia, Bosnia, Macedonia, they're all being abandoned. They're just being deserted because there's no economic activity. It's too small of a country to have any kind of economic activity. You end up with countries that are dependent on whatever the dominant superpower is, or supranational entity, which is the EU. Croatia's not cheap. Yeah, it's not cheap anymore, but I mean cheap relative to Germany, right? Or maybe relative to Spain. It's probably cheaper than Spain. I don't know exactly. I'm just going based on my understanding of cost of living. If you're like a German or you're a Swede, I imagine that going to Croatia is cheaper than going to Spain or going to southern France or going to northern Italy or something. And Anton, at least the Turks were the majority in the Ottoman Empire, not so much for whites. Well, no, they weren't the majority. Anton, they were not the majority. Turks were actually mostly represented in the countryside. The cities were majority minority. They were minority Turkish. The Turks were actually a plurality of the Ottoman Empire in Anatolia. Not even a plurality in the Ottoman Empire as a whole. Ottoman Empire was a complete fucking mess. It was a hodgepodge of all these different ethnicities all bunched all over the place because they had this system called the millet system, which I guess this is now turning into the Turkey stream, Ottoman stream. They had a system called the millet system where you were identified based on your religion, not your ethnicity, and that was what determined your specific set of rights. And as a result, you ended up with there would just be Christians, Jews, and Muslims recognized officially by the Ottomans. There were no Turks, Arabs, Armenians, Jews. Well, there were Jews, but you know what I mean. They didn't have ethnic identifiers. And as a result, just due to labor migration around the empire, you ended up with all these hodgepodges all over the place. You had Turks all over the empire, various outposts of the empire. You had Armenians, Jews, Greeks all over Anatolia, wherever the money would take them, basically. And it was a completely dysfunctional situation. It was completely disharmonious. But isn't Turkey going back to some form of Ottomanism because of the waning population and birth rates? Kind of. Ataturk, what they want to do is Ataturk wants to establish or not Ataturk, excuse me, Ataturk. Erdogan wants to try and recreate like a national, multinational community. Like, okay, the way that empires work now, it's not like the early days. Like the early way that empires used to work is you annex the territory and you replace the government and you build infrastructure. Nowadays, there's already governments in place in these countries, and the goal is, if you want to become a great power, your goal is to create supranational bodies that these countries are a part of. So what Turkey wants to do is they want to create like a Muslim international body that they are the leading member of, and then include these countries in them, and then form economic relationships with these countries that allow them to have this influence and project power. You know, like the reason why NATO exists and the reason why the EU exists is so America can have bases on the Eurasian continent to project power into other parts of Eurasia. Okay, that's the reason why the United States has its relationship with Japan and South Korea, and how they have their relationship with Western Europe. It's so that they have these launching points to project power into into their actual rivals. That's how empire is done in the 21st century. It's not where you actually physically control this territory. You don't need to do that anymore. Like, economies are now efficient enough and are now advanced enough that economic relationships alone can serve as the basis for a client state versus a dominant power relationship. Right? I'm jealous of Western Europeans. They can geomax to Eastern Europe, since Eastern Europe women are extremely attractive. Well, Javier, it's not as easy as it sounds, because, like, I would say that was something you could do in the 90s and 2000s, because this was right after the collapse of communism, and the Eastern Europeans didn't have a lot of contact with the outside world, so they did have, I guess, what you could say are relatively conservative social norms. Nowadays, like, if you're a Polish woman, you can go on the internet and you can see how desirable like Polish women are for, like, compared to women of the entire world, and you know that you're highly sought after based on your physical attractiveness and your features, your ethnic characteristics, right? So they know that they're not in a position where you can just win them over by being a Westerner and just waltzing in and being like, look at me, I'm an American, aren't I desirable? It doesn't work that way anymore. There's actually one guy in my server who he's ethnically Polish, but he grew up in Germany, and he works for a company, an international company, and he gets paid high Western European style income, and he's living in Poland. He doesn't get any advantage from that. They're not impressed. They don't they're very similar in that regard to Western European women. You know, that doesn't work anymore. That worked previous eras when the economic situation was harder. It's not the same now. In Slovakia, yeah, I would suggest Anton and Darzog that you guys like having a debate about the intricacies of the Treaty of Trianon, and that I don't know how much, I can't really add anything to that, so. So is there a goal, like, to have a ruling class of this multinational conglomerate be Turks as the best case scenario? Yeah, Turks would be the dominant force. Like, I think the most ambitious Turks, like, by that I mean like Turkish political thinkers, what they want to do is they want to create like a petro-lira. I think that's their long-term goal, I suspect. The idea would be that Turkey provides military protection to the Gulf states, and the advantage that they have over the U.S. is that they have a good relationship with Iran. Okay, so they can ensure the security of the Gulf states without tension with Iran. And in addition, if the Gulf states were to sell oil in liras, this would provide a massive, powerful boost to the Turkish economy. And Turkey is already the most modern and industrialized country in the Middle East, by far. I mean, I guess technically Israel, you could say Israel is that. But if we're talking like real countries, because Israel is a really tiny country, it's not really... If we're talking like a major country, Turkey is the most modernized. It's basically the western half of Turkey is a first world country. The eastern half of Turkey is more like the Middle East. But they have the industrial base that now they have. The problem is that Erdogan is stupid. He's a fucking idiot. So he manipulates the currency, and it causes the lira to be a total disaster. But he's not going to be in charge forever. Once there's a more competent leader in charge, this would be a golden opportunity for them. They could stabilize the situation in Iran. They could establish a petro-lira relationship. Now, you guys know I've talked about how like the myth of the petrodollar. Petrodollar is not a real thing. Okay, like these countries have always been able to sell their oil in other currencies. It's just that they use the US dollar because it was the global medium of exchange. That's what gives it its value. And if you hear anybody talking about the petrodollar with any air of confidence, that's a midwit signal. If they're talking like that, that means they're a midwit. Oh, hang on. Feltree sent me another $2 tip. Thank you very much, Feltree. It's never been a worse time to geomax because smartphones have flattened culture and social media have allowed women to essentially vaccinate against insecurity and allow an objective idea of the situation so men from foreign cultures have less advantages. Yes, 100%. That's true. You know, one of the major characteristics of globalization through social media is that like you're not a rare commodity or surprising commodity in most of the world now. You know, like most of the world has seen white people. They know what white people look like. They've probably seen a lot of white people just in media, you know? So you're not really anything surprising anymore. And especially if they learn English, they're going to interact with you a lot. There's nothing really special about you. They could talk to plenty of Westerners, you know, if they speak English, especially if they speak English, which in most cases that's how you're going to talk to them, right? So it's not the same situation as it was before. In America is the modern at Odarom. Se at Todarom? Is that code? Is that messaging? Yeah. Let me just see here, though. As you have mentioned, wouldn't it be advantageous to still annex land in order to grow your... Well, yeah, of course it always is. Why wouldn't it be? It's always advantageous. As you mentioned, the Polish man-woman thing, how are you supposed to attract your fellow woman then? Well, if you're Polish, for example, you're already at a disadvantage. Like if you're a local Polish guy, because you're not only competing with your own men who are abroad and have earned like money from wealthier countries, you're also dealing with men from those countries trying to poach your women. Like it's Eastern European men are among white men. I would say Eastern European men are probably in like the worst situation, just due to the competition that they're dealing with, or like it will get increasingly worse for them, you know, because Western Europeans, we do still have somewhat of a status boost. There is some benefit to being a Western European descent, status wise. So that does give you a little bit. Eastern Europeans don't have that advantage. And at the same time, they have to compete with Western Europeans who not only do have that advantage, but also have the ability to outcompete them on resources. Interesting. I remember reading that the Arab medieval caliphates were just ruling in suzerainty with some honors paid to them. Well, yeah. So the way that it worked in the Muslim world is, formally speaking, the Sultan is Sultan being like basically the equivalent of a king. The Sultan is not actually ruling in his own name, officially, like in terms of how Islamic law works. They're officially ruling as a representative of the caliph. So as a sultan, you're not technically a king. in practice, they were kings. Like in practice, the caliph, there were periods of time when the caliphate had a lot of central power, but in most of its history, it was like it was kind of like the Japanese emperor, where the Japanese emperor, he was formally speaking, he had a very high degree of ritual and symbolic authority, but practically speaking, he didn't have any military behind him. And what would happen with the Japanese is a samurai clan would capture the capital of Japan, and then they would marry their daughters of the clan to the Japanese emperor, and this would be like they would just continue to breed their line into the Japanese emperorship. So the child of that samurai clan's woman and the Japanese emperor, that child would then be married off to another member of that clan, and then their child would be married off until effectively they were like most of their female line is from this dominant samurai clan that currently controls the shogunate. And it's kind of similar in some ways to how it worked with the Muslim world. Like the caliph was sort of symbolic, and the sultans, or in some cases like the Mamluks, would rule in their name. That's typically how it worked. Even C-girls started to talk like Western women. My GF just today told me that his friend kept saying, or her friend, I think, kept saying that she wants to have her fun first, then family. Yeah, I think part of that is just that's just kind of a liberal phenomenon, right? There's like individualism increases. It's almost a function of technology. For example, in Islam, it is this is like the Ayatollah stream, it seems. In Islam, it's actually I don't know if it's considered a sin exactly, but it's strongly discouraged. It's not considered permissible to have house insurance in Islam. And the reason for that is because having a for-profit insurance system in place of community support for a natural disaster, let's say, or like say your house burns down, this is seen as removing the individual from the community. This is a way for the individual to extract themselves from maintaining their community bonds in order to protect themselves from if a disaster strikes. And this is why in Islam, it is forbidden in many cases to have house insurance, or at least formally speaking, it's forbidden. You couldn't imagine something like that with a Western country, but like it really does. If you think about what the market will do, the market, like if you can give people the option to remove themselves from social responsibility, like responsibility to their community or whatever, like people are naturally going to do it, right? So when you allow market forces in there, like what's the purpose of market forces? It's to monetize sections of the economy and to create as efficient markets as possible. Monetize as much of daily life as you can and make sure that monetization is as efficient as it can be. Well, this is again an example. It's more efficient from a market perspective to monetize an insurance arrangement than to just have like a communal, like whenever there's a disaster, the community donates to rebuild a person's house. There's no economic transaction that's happening there. Whereas with an insurance relationship, there is an economic transaction. It's increasing economic activity. And that's always what's going to happen when you have a capitalist system. Well, these places, they have capitalist systems. They're always going to tend towards greater individualism, greater individual choice. And this filters down into social norms. It's naturally, like, it's not so much that liberalism will actively endorse, or like you'll see liberals, well, I mean, you do see liberals push for social liberalism, but it's more so that there's no way of preventing it. It's like a ratchet that only goes up in one direction. And so you're just constantly ratcheting up in one direction. You cannot go the other direction. That's the main thing that you see. I think there's more status to being Western European than American from the women I've interacted with. I mean, American is not really a useful signal anymore. Like I remember when I was a young cell, and I was playing games. I worked overnight for a department store. So I was working, I think it was 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. So it was 100% overnight. And as a result, I would end up playing video games at like the early morning period. So like 8 a.m. to like 1 p.m. or something. And so I'd end up playing games on Korean servers. And hang on one second. So I would play games on Korean servers, and I met this Korean guy who I built up like a rapport with because we used to game together. And I remember he worked at a, he worked as a, what's the term for the guys that check in people when they're on flights? Like when they go through the flight to board a plane, they check in. Well, whatever the name is for that, he was doing that. And I remember he told me that before 2010, when a Canadian would show up on a flight, it was pretty much always going to be some kind of white guy. After 2010, it was a very high chance that it was going to be some Indian or some Chinese or some whatever else. Like he lost the ability to judge, like when you would see a Canadian passport, you lose the signal for judging who that would be in terms of their ethnicity or their race because of how rapidly diversified Canada got. And it's funny because I think America is kind of similar to that too now, where, an American, what even is an American? Like it's very racially ambiguous, so like, are they going to be a recent immigrant who just happens to have an American passport? Well, that's going to affect how they're perceived, Another thing that reminds me of, there was a famous BP clip of this Indian guy who says, "I am from Germany," and he's obviously an Indian. He's like a 5'6" Indian guy, and he goes up to like an English woman, and he's like, "I'm from Germany." Bro, Kumar, no one believes you're from fucking Germany. Come on. And that's what it makes me think of. Oh, Mercer, I might be too Romanian for this, but why would you expect your local community to actually step up and help you? Who would hold them accountable themselves? Well, yeah, that's exactly who would hold them accountable, in theory. I mean, that's usually how it would work. And the problem is, when you break down those community norms, it's very hard to reconstruct them because they're trust-based. And when you allow people to defect from the trust-based system and to join on with like a personalized private system, because listen, like the reason why the trust-based systems were not naturally preferred by people is because it put limits on their behavior. It constrained their behavior. They could not act however they pleased because you had to worry about how the community would perceive you. If you have insurance on everything, you don't have to give a shit about any of your neighbors, how they think about you, other than like obviously legal, right? You have to be worried about your legal limitations. But as long as like if you have that removal from vulnerability based on how they perceive you, you can act however you want. You can be an asshole. You can treat them like shit, and it doesn't matter. It's relevant, right? So there's naturally going to be a tendency to prefer that over a system where you have to be concerned about what your neighbors think about you, and you have to be socially cooperative. So it naturally tends to abolish itself in a sad way. And then once it's gone, like Anton said, I mean, he's from Romania. You can't conceive of a community that would do that would be like that, because everybody is already like completely zero trust, like shitty people. It's very difficult to go from zero trust to something higher trust. It's something once you lose it, it's very hard to recreate, probably impossible to recreate. Kumar wants white women's, yeah, pretty much. Look, JBW is a real thing, but it goes in both directions. I've noticed, it's not just ethnic women. that are interested in white men. It also goes the other way. There's a lot of ethnic guys that are interested in white women. I'm not saying it's every single one, but I'm saying it's a substantial number. It's a non-zero number, significant. Which, I personally don't care if people are like, white girl widowed, I guess. If you're white girl widowed and you can only be attracted to white women for whatever reason, I mean, I'm not going to feel bad for you because I'm just like, that just seems like crying that your lobster is not perfectly cooked or whatever. But, that's up to you if that's how you are. I'm not going to be mad at you, but if you can get what you prefer, then that's good for you, but most of the time that just ends up with not getting what you prefer, right? Let's see here. There's no significant Asian community here. Oh, man, I get those Indian Instagrams. They're so brutal, but they humanize them to me. Indian Instagrams. What are we talking about? Indian Instagrams. There's no significant Asian community. If I find one, they're hermetically sealed and I'm not interested in local men. Yeah, I don't know about that one, Darzog. Yeah. Insurance existed here until the 1900s and only in the big cities. Before even the countryside, the only people who would help you were maybe your close relatives and maybe the priest. Yeah, I don't know. I can't speak for the former communist states, but I'm just saying that's the cultural justification that Muslims use for opposing insurance as a system. And there's logic to it. It's not unreasonable. You could say it's inefficient. You could say, well, it makes more sense to have it to outsource this to an insurance company that has a lot more resources, and therefore you don't have to draw on the local resources of a community. You can just pull from this insurance company. It makes a lot more sense in terms of efficiency, but I do think the cultural arguments, there's truth to it. Darzak, being white girl widowed is only a reasonable justification for white men. I mean, that's okay. I don't, I have a lot of sympathy for guys that are in a position where they want their own women, but their own women don't want them, right? I have a lot of sympathy for that. There's an example of this. I won't name names, but there's a guy in our circles who's part of a community that is ethnically distinct and is quite small in numbers and is potentially diminishing to the point of disappearance. And he is an inky in the sense that he tried for his entire early adult life to attract a woman of his background because he was genuinely concerned about that. He was concerned about, he wanted to contribute to his people's survival and propagation, but they were not interested. And so he's in a situation now where he has to pick a woman that's not from his background, and it's very depressing because you think, my people have gone through thousands of years of struggle and we managed to survive, and then I screw this up just because I can't attract one of our own girls, and therefore my membership in this community that has survived for thousands of years and that it has this ancient culture attached to it is now ended with me. I'm like the last in line, and it's not because I died tragically in some struggle in a war or whatever, or as the victim of a genocide or something. It's because I just couldn't attract a woman of my own background. I wasn't attractive enough. And that is really tragic. I remember when I would talk to him, I would have a hard time relating to that. Because even though, there's a lot of talk about, white genocide, the reality is that there's 800 million white people in the world. We are facing a problem, a major problem, but we're not going extinct anytime soon. We're not. There's still a long time. I mean, the trajectory is not looking good, but there's still a long time to go before we're facing serious problems. Not like some of the smaller ethnic groups. If you think of the Druze, for example, or the what are they called? Samaritans, that's another group, Samaritans. They're also a very tiny ethnic group. Like, those guys are genuinely facing extinction, just due to their tiny numbers. You can't really relate to that. And it sort of puts Inkydom in a really tragic and existential light in a way that it doesn't really for us. But there is an element that's related to that with being white and having this situation. Like, how do I perpetuate my existence, of my people? Like, if I think of the warm memories that I attach to my own background, I can't reproduce that, even if I get a white woman, it's most likely not going to be from my background, especially at my age. And that's assuming I can even get one, right? So I can relate to that a lot. What you've spoken about fits Hungarians to a small group, thousands of years of history. Yeah, that's true. Romanian whites are also dealing with this. Yeah, that's true. You're right, though I would say it's a little, because here's the thing, okay? Romanians and Hungarians, you guys are distinct, but you are also related closely to other Europeans around you, right? Like, the way that Europeans work genetically is that we're basically like a gradient, a genetic gradient. There's actually, like, the borders between European ethnicities are very fuzzy, and almost, in fact, they're almost non-existent. Like, you can map the genetic distance between Europeans as a function of physical distance, because of how porous European cultures were. So yeah, I mean, there's cultural risks that you have, but, like, for example, if you're a Hungarian, genetically speaking, your ancestry, like, you have the cultural legacy of the Magyar, but ancestrally speaking, your ancestry goes back further into the Pannonian Basin, the Europeans of the Pannonian Basin, right? Like, you're all still related to the other Europeans, Whereas some of these groups, like, for example, Samaritans are genetically very distinct. There's no other group that resembles them to this day. And as a matter of fact, what's really funny about the Samaritans is, genetically speaking, they're the closest group to the ancient Israelites that exist today. They're closer than Jews, and they're closer than Palestinians. They're genetically almost identical to the ancient Israelites. No other group that exists that's quite like them. And, like, if they married Jews, for example, like, their closest cultural cousins would be Jews, but if they interbreed with Jews, the offspring is not going to be the same. Even if they're raised as a Samaritan, that unique genetic community is not going to be, it's not the same genetic composition. You know what I mean? So there is that element, definitely. It is still a problem. That's not to diminish the issue that we're facing, right? Like, the Irish have this problem too. The Irish are facing a real disaster in Ireland. Scandinavia, Sweden, there's only, 6 million Swedes, or 7 million Swedes, something like that, ethnic Swedes, and they're getting swamped. But, yeah. At least if you're a Swede, like, you could, in theory, recolonize Sweden with people that genetically are very close in resemblance to Swedes. And then you could like, reestablish a culture there that has some resemblance to it, I don't think you can do that with some of these other, like, thousands of years of genetic isolation, some of these communities. The Irish are the curry cells, the white race. No, if they were curry cells, they'd be hard workers. Yeah, I'm just joking. I'm not anti-Irish. I love our Irish brethren. I'm actually I'm on the wrong side of the Irish. I'm Irish on my mother's side, but I'm Scots-Irish. I'm not Catholic Irish. So I'd be any Fenians that are watching my stream. You would actually be my ops. You'd be my enemies. Proto-Indo-European, Vandal, Roman, Greco, and Berber populations of the Middle East and North Africa are usually not considered by rightoid doomers. Yeah, I mean, the Vandals, they kind of, I don't think they existed after the Muslim conquest. They kind of just disappeared. Nobody really knows what happened to them. The Berbers are an interesting group, though. I mean, well, the thing is, with the Arab expansion, they didn't exactly invade and like genetically colonize North Africa. Like if you look at where Gulf Arabs, like the kind of genetic like racial Arabs that we think of from the Gulf, if you want to see where they had a genetic impact, is in Iraq and it is in Sudan. And to some extent there was also in North Africa, but the rest of the Middle East, the concentrations were lower. Like there is some Middle Eastern or some Gulf Arab admixture throughout the Middle East, but we're talking like maybe 10-15%. We're not talking like an entire genetic replacement. Actually, what was a big replacement in North Africa was the introduction of sub-Saharan African ancestry due to the slave trade. So with the slave trade, there was the migration of these slaves into Egypt, for example, for working the farms in Egypt. And the way that it would work in Egypt was, and also the rest of the Muslim world, they would castrate the male slaves. And it was usually a quite grisly form of castration. Like they would take the meat and two veg, as they say in Austin Powers. They'd take the whole thing and just chop it off with a knife. And I think it was like the majority of the slaves that they did this to would bleed to death. And they would just keep the ones that didn't bleed to death. It's very gruesome. But the female slaves were not touched. And of course, what happens to the female slaves? We know what happens to the female slaves based on what happened in America. The same thing happened in the Middle East. The female slaves they had slave masters that had relations with them. And over time, this increased the frequency of sub-Saharan African ancestry in the Middle Eastern populations. And this was throughout the Middle East as well. Actually, I'll see if I can find there's a really useful map that shows this. It's a little bit old, but I mean, it's a very, like sub-Saharan African is a very basal racial component, so it's not like the information has changed much. So let's see if I can find it. Hold on. Let me see here. But yeah, if you ever see Sudanese, like I've known some Sudanese, and there are black Sudanese, but there are also Sudanese that look like they could be straight out of the Arabian Peninsula because of how Arab they look. And that's because there was a high degree of settlement of Arab tribes in Sudan in particular. Let's see here. Okay, this is probably in my... I thought it was in my race folder, but it's not. I think it's in my specifically black folder. Let's see here. Where is it? Yeah, look, I don't like moralizing. I don't like moralizing the slave trade and making it all about like, oh, the Arabs were so much meaner than us. It doesn't matter. Look, like everybody had slaves. Slavery was just a condition of existence. Like the ancient Greeks had slaves. None of them were blacks, but the ancient Greeks had slaves, and they couldn't conceive of a society that did not have slaves. Like the idea that you could have a society that did not have slaves was just inconceivable to them, because they would think, well, who would do all the work so that the citizens are able to engage in politics and engage in philosophy? Like who would be doing all the philosophizing? Who would be doing all the intellectual stuff? Like that's the way they were thinking. You know, that's just sort of the condition of humanity. But the result was, like, this is why, for example, you have African communities in the former European colonies, even in European colonies that had, like, really grisly treatment of slaves, like Haiti, for example. Like, the Haitian slaves were treated very brutally. But because they didn't castrate the men and they allowed them to breed and reproduce, they were able to establish their own populations in the New World. Whereas in the Middle East, it was only the women that reproduced, and they would, of course, reproduce mixed-race population. And the mixed-race population would introgress into the rest of the population, and over time, this elevated the sub-Saharan African admixture in the population. Let's see here. I thought I had... Oh, here it is. This is what I'm looking for. Found it. There. You see this here? This is sub-Saharan African admixture. It might be a little out of date, but it does generally give you the impression of the Middle East in particular. And there was some of this that existed before. There was some African ancestry that existed in Arab populations before this, but it was elevated most certainly by the slave trade, the Arab slave trade. Modern-day Berbers are more sub-Saharan shifted than ancient Berbers. And the same goes for Egyptians in particular are an interesting group because Egyptians, the ancient Egyptians clustered genetically more closer to Levantines than they do to modern Egyptians. Modern Egyptians are actually shifted quite far from ancient Egyptians due to this African admixture. And you can see this little, actually, this is another funny little thing. Now we're getting into genetic spurging near the end of the stream. You can see this little secondary part here. This is what I was talking about with the Arab colonization of Sudan. This is a genetic hotspot of Gulf Arab ancestry. And actually, I'm going to show you another thing. We'll get into a little bit of this, a little bit of genetic spurging before we go here. There we go. Fucking hell. Come on. Oh. Hang on. Let's do external content. There, you see J1 is a very good proxy for Gulf Arab paternal ancestry. And you can see that there's a second cluster of J1 in Sudan here. And this corresponds with this, if you see. Corresponds roughly. Yeah. Anyways, that's a little bit of a genetic fun fact. Did Ryder tell you this? No. This is look. You don't even have to ask that. I'm a massive autist when it comes to this shit. There was even a study on it. Actually, let's see if I can. I might actually have this one saved here as well. Hold on. Ancient Egyptians. Let me see. Yeah, here we are. So this is where ancient Egyptians clustered these three dots. And if you look at where modern Egyptians are, let me see here. Jordanian, Lebanese, Palestinian, Syrian, Bedouin, Tunisian, Moroccan, Libyan. Here, modern Egypt, or the... Yeah, see what I mean? They're shifted towards these blue, which are the Biaka, Mandinka. These are sub-Saharan Africans, right? So the modern Egyptians are shifted towards sub-Saharan Africans. Ancient Egyptians are shifted towards the Middle East. So these are Jordanians, Lebanese, Palestinians, etc. So it's rather interesting. Make of that of what you will. I mean, some people say, like, this is like, there's a Nordicist theory that this was like the downfall of the white man, the passing of the great race, march of the Titans, that sort of thing. I don't believe that. But it does show that that these sort of things can have consequences over a long enough time span. And what's interesting is you saw a similar process happen with Latin America. You know, they didn't necessarily have slaves that they bred with singularly, though they did in Brazil, but you saw in like the indigenous population, they would intermix with them and produce mixed race population. You know, they didn't start that way, but it happened over time. Anyways, guys, I think I'm going to end the stream now because we've gone past 3 hours. It's been great to have you all on. Let me see if there's anything I'm missing here. Just going to double check. No, thank you very much to Feltree. You've been really generous. I'm going to set you up in my Discord when I end the stream. So I will talk to you guys later.